Chapter 35. The record of internal meditation of Xianyuan was the supreme method of opening meridians. It was an orthodox ancient Xianmen, but those who succeeded would easily incur the jealousy of the heavens. After succeeding, a lightning tribulation would descend. It would not harm the body, the soul, the heart, or the mind, but it would cause the sound of thunder and the five elements to injure the tribulation. It would shake the cultivator's foundation and block the path to heaven. Those who could not avoid it in time would have all their previous efforts wasted. Not to mention the fact that all their hard work would be wasted, they would no longer have any hope of cultivating Tao. However, the heaven and earth were mysterious, there would naturally be a chance of survival. Before the lightning tribulation, there would be signs. If the tribulation taker had a way to deal with it, he would be able to avoid the tribulation in time and achieve Xianmen cultivation. Zhang Yan had received the secret from Luo Xiao beforehand. Now that the heaven and earth had changed, he had sensed it in advance. He knew that the lightning tribulation was coming soon and would destroy his Tao foundation. Fellow Taoist, please avoid it quickly. Luo Xiao's expression turned cold. She and Zhang Yan had a blood oath. If one of them died, they would die together. Once Zhang Yan's cultivation was destroyed, there would be no hope of immortality in this life. How could she tolerate it when she only had a short life of 100 years? Therefore, with the lightning tribulation approaching, she could not help but feel anxious. The black light on her body swept across the ground a few times and immediately dug a shallow pit under the cave, just enough for one person to lie in. Zhang Yan no longer hesitated. He used Yuan Zhen to seal his facial features and closed his senses. Luo Xiao quickly used gravel and soil to bury him. After everything was settled, there was a sudden rumble of thunder in the sky. Luo Xiao's heart shuddered when she heard it. The thunder was grand and majestic. It was completely different from normal thunder. Furthermore, the thunder actually penetrated through the layers of the cave and went straight into the cave. It was as if it was ringing right beside her ears. Fortunately, it was only a huge commotion. There was no lightning and fire. Even so, as a demon cultivator, Luo Xiao instinctively felt a sense of fear towards the thunder. Only then did she remember why the two Shell Kings were nowhere to be seen. They must have also sensed the lightning tribulation and found a place to hide. Even she felt a little uneasy about the terrifying thunder, let alone the two uncivilized Meng demons. 7 days later, the thunder finally subsided. Without waiting for Luo Xiao to dig up the soil, Zhang Yan leaped up from the ground. At this moment, he suddenly felt his body become light, as if a person who was originally carrying a heavy load had put down a heavy burden. In the depths of his body, there was even a different kind of qi activity growing, like the power of growth when all living things were germinating. It was unstoppable, and it broke out along with him. At this moment, his cultivation could be considered to have attained perfection, and he'd crossed the first door of the Grand Tao. At this moment, he seemed to have sensed something and turned his head to take a look. He saw that the two Shell Kings had flown back unknowingly and were lying at the entrance of the cave, letting out a sad cry. It was obvious that they knew that the profound bead had been lost. However, they had fought with Du Bo for a long time and were not completely unharmed. After losing the profound bead and being frightened by the lightning tribulation, they were already dispirited and listless. Luo Xiao's beautiful eyes turned and she said, "Fellow Zhang, why don't we take this opportunity to take these two Shell Kings and find another spiritual place to settle down? After a year or two, there will be another shell field, and maybe we can condense another shell profound bead." However, Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "That's not appropriate. The Yin shell originally belonged to the head of the Yutsang sect. If I take it, not only the Du clan, even the Yutsang sect will investigate this matter. The implications are too great, it's better to stop here, but..." He paused and said, "The passage made by this Yang shell is too conspicuous. When the Du clan and the Yutsang sect come to investigate, they will definitely find out. Not only will the shell field at the side not be safe, even the matter of the profound bead may be found out. We need to find a safe way. From his point of view, he wanted to create the illusion that Du Bo killed someone at the scene, but the specific reason naturally didn't need to be understood by the people investigating, so they could worry about it. If the matter of the profound bead was leaked, it would be hard to avoid a target direction, and the scope would be reduced by a lot, which would be disadvantageous to himself. Therefore, not only did he have to think of a way to take away the yang shell, he also couldn't leave behind all the spirit shells in the shell field at the side. This matter is simple. The yang shell is not like the yin shell, it likes to move its nest, so we just need to find another place to settle down. From Luo Zhao's point of view, condensing a profound bead was rarely seen in 100 years. If she took away the yang shell, no one would be able to associate it with this matter. As for those spirit shells, she now had the Qiankuan sleeve pouch, so she didn't have to worry about trouble moving around. The good thing about this matter was that those 12 people were killed by Du Bo himself, so no matter what, he would be the first suspect of the Du clan and the Yutzang sect. However, this person was already dead, and cultivators who had opened their meridians were already half a step into the gate of immortality, so his location couldn't be found by relying on the technique of deduction. Therefore, this matter would most likely be left unsettled in the end. As for Zhang Yan, with his strength, there was no way he would be able to associate it with him. If someone said that this matter was done by a cultivator who had yet to open his meridians, he would only be seen as a joke by others. After the discussion, the two of them immediately swept away all the spirit shells at the location of the yang shell. There were no less than 40 to 50,000 spirit shells, and it was impossible to fit them all in one Qiankuan sleeve pouch. Luo Zhao had to go back and forth several times before it was properly taken care of. As for the yang shell, she took advantage of the moment when it was weak and powerless to find another cave thousands of miles away to settle it down. However, the Shell King was good at moving underground, so it couldn't be kept for long. Therefore, she took a strand of blood essence in her hand, so no matter where the shell went the next day, she would be able to find it with the guidance of the blood essence. This was only to prevent the yang shell from finding the yin shell again. After everything was settled, Zhang Yan still couldn't immediately return to the mountain gate. To him, there was still an important thing to do, and that was to find a suitable reason to explain his opening of meridians. The Jade Elixir Essence Pool of the world was either held in the hands of the large sects, or it was hidden in the various Xianmen aristocratic families. Opening of meridians couldn't be separated from the Jade Elixir Essence Pool. In the eyes of the elders and fellow disciples, Zhang Yan wasn't born in an aristocratic family, so how could he succeed in opening his meridians just by going down the mountain? The method could be explained as it was bestowed by the master. Others couldn't cultivate it, but he could do it without any hindrance. Others couldn't say anything, and could only say that this was his opportunity. However, no matter what, he couldn't avoid the Jade Elixir Essence Pool. He had to find a safe way to plug this loophole, so that others wouldn't be able to see through it. However, Zhang Yan already had a plan in mind for this matter. After Princess Linya Chaoying delivered 1,000 pounds of divine sand, she said that the disciple from the North Star sect who used to pester her heard that Chaoying had made contact with Zhang Yan, changed his attitude and became extremely courteous to her. He even went to ask Chaoying to let him meet with Zhang Yan if there was a chance. The North Star sect belonged to the bottom of the second-rate sects, and naturally couldn't compare to a colossus like the Yinsang sect. However, to be able to occupy a paradise and establish a sect, they should have some foundation. Zhang Yan planned to start with this person. Moreover, since this person was so eager to make contact with him, he must have some other request. If Zhang Yan asked him to find a Jade Elixir Essence Pool, he wouldn't dare to refuse. After opening his meridians, Zhang Yan wasn't in a hurry. Moreover, Luo Zhao was a demon cultivator, and it was easy for people with ulterior motives to spy on him if he rode on the mystic light during the day. Therefore, he simply stayed in a nearby county and sent someone to deliver a letter to the residence of Princess Linya Chaoying. A few days later, the disciple of the North Star sect hurried over. This person was called Yan Jinping. He was about 34 or 35 years old, with a short beard on his chin. He wore a crimson robe with crane patterns, a turban on his head, and a pair of black boots. He didn't look like a cultivator, but more like a noble court official. As soon as he saw Zhang Yan, he had a fawning expression. When Zhang Yan mentioned the purpose of his visit, he didn't even ask for the reason and said without thinking, "Under my North Star sect, there are a few declining aristocratic families with jade elixir essence pools in Yongtang County. Senior brother and I will find a few of them." Zhang Yan said lightly, "There's no need for too many people." Yan Jinping was quick-witted and immediately understood, saying, "I will definitely satisfy senior brother." About 10 days later, Yan Jinping brought a middle-aged man who looked like an old farmer to see Zhang Yan. He was a very perceptive person and knew what he shouldn't hear or ask. After bringing the person, he took the initiative to leave. Seeing that he was so tactful, Zhang Yan secretly nodded and felt that this person was useful. "I am a disciple of the lower house of the Yutsang sect. I need to borrow your clan's jade elixir essence pool." As soon as Zhang Yan revealed his identity, the middle-aged man was shocked at first, but then his expression became even more respectful. However, a hint of nervousness could be seen in his expression. He said, "Since the celestial master wants to borrow it, I dare not comply. Just take it, but..." Before coming, Yan Jinping had already explained that this was an important guest from a large sect, but he didn't expect it to be from the Yutsang sect. The Yutsang sect was one of the 16 major sects in Donghua continent, and this person was a disciple of the lower house. He might even be a direct descendant of some Xianmen aristocratic family. In the future, he would be the backbone of a sect with a blessed place. How could he dare to offend him? Even the North Star sect could destroy his entire clan with a flip of his hand. Seeing him hesitate, Zhang Yan asked again, "What's the problem?" The middle-aged man didn't dare to raise his head, and said in a low voice, "My Han clan has produced many great cultivators in the early years. One of my ancestors even broke through the void and left behind a first-class essence pool. But in the past 100 years, there hasn't been a single essence-building cultivator in the clan. In my generation, it has fallen to the 4th class. I don't know if this is in line with the Celestial Master's intentions." Zhang Yan didn't care and said, "It doesn't matter, as long as it can be used. This time I'll borrow your clan's jade elixir essence pool. If you have any requests, I can help you once." The stone embryo in the jade elixir essence pool needed 100 years, or even 1,000 years of cultivation before it could be upgraded step by step. This person said that it had been sealed for 100 years, but it had only fallen to the 4th class. If it was true, then the original first-class essence pool should be correct. But he didn't care about this. This time he just wanted to set up a cover to explain the reason why he opened his meridians. The middle-aged man hesitated a few times, and finally plucked up his courage and said, "If there is a disciple in my clan who is suitable to cultivate in the future, I hope the Celestial Master can help me." After he finished speaking, he couldn't help but feel nervous in his heart. He didn't know if the other party would be angry because of this. Zhang Yan looked at the other party. This person was quite smart. If he was successful in his cultivation in the future, and this person had a disciple in his clan who was suitable to cultivate in the Tao, he only needed to help him and he could enter the Yutsang sect to cultivate. It could be said that he had reached the heavens in a single bound. This was a good deal. Good. Zhang Yan immediately agreed, "I'll allow you to use 260 years to guide one of your clan's disciples into the sect. As for how good his luck is, it will depend on him." The middle-aged man was overjoyed. He solemnly bowed and said, "Thank you, Immortal Master." After he got up, he said, "I ask the Celestial Master to move. This jade elixir essence pool is in the Yin Luo Mountains. It's only a 2-day journey from here." Chapter 36. Over the past few months, there was a shocking piece of news on Mount Kanggu. It was said that Du Yu, the disciple of the Du clan of Helen, borrowed the Pearl King's true Du to open his meridians, but was killed by Du Bo and robbed of his treasure. Du Bo's whereabouts were unknown, and it was likely that he was already dead. Although the Du clan tried their best to cover up this matter, how could they hide it from the eyes and ears of the Xianmen aristocratic families? Everyone in the lower house was gloating. The Du clan had always been arrogant, and this time, they did not follow the rules and forcefully took away the position of the eldest disciple. They deserved this. Now that the Du clan's previous arrangements were all in vain, it was impossible for them to interfere in the lower house. After a series of maneuvers by the Lin clan, Lin Yuan became the eldest disciple as he wished. Just as he was feeling complacent, Zhang Yan, who he thought was chased off the mountain by Du, returned to the mountain. At first, he did not take it to heart. It was strange that Zhang Yan did not return after the Du clan's death. However, there was another shocking news. After not seeing each other for 2 months, Zhang Yan had already cut off the golden locks, opened his meridians, and stepped into the great path of Heavenly Gate. This was even more shocking than Du Yu's disappearance. When Lin Yuan heard about this, he sat there for a long time. The joy in his heart disappeared, and what replaced it was a bad mood. He had worked hard to become the eldest disciple of the lower house, but Zhang Yan, who he thought he had to get rid of, had actually surpassed him. Wouldn't he, the eldest disciple, become a joke? For the first time in his life, Lin Yuan hated the rules of the family. If he did not have to sit in the lower house for 16 years, he could have opened his meridians and entered the upper house. How could he have fallen behind Zhang Yan? This news made many of the lower house aristocratic family's disciples unable to react, and the Mount Kangwu was silent. How many years had it been? Zhang Yan had only been on the mountain for 3 years, and it had only been half a year since he became an inner disciple. How could he have opened his meridians in 2 months? Didn't they say that Zhang Yan's aptitude was average and that he could only be a strong man? On the contrary, Du Yu, who swore to take Zhang Yan's life, went missing after opening his meridians. There was a strong contrast between the two. Hao Jue Peak, Du Zhen Hall. When Zhang Yan stepped into the hall again, Shi Shoujing, He Shoushuan, and Zhen Shouzhong did not dare to sit on the stone platform. They all stood up and bowed. The position of the lower house guru had always been held by those in the sect who had not made much progress in the path of cultivation. This was why they could guard their loneliness and face the common people day and night. As for those who had opened their meridians in the lower house, once they entered the upper house, they would become the backbone of the sect and become true disciples. They would be bestowed with paradises, elixirs, and dharma books. In the future, their path of cultivation would be smooth, and their future prospects would far surpass the 3 of them. As such, they did not respect the current Zhang Yan, but his future achievements. Greetings to the 3 masters. Although he had successfully opened his meridian channels, Zhang Yan's actions did not show the slightest hint of arrogance. He was still as respectful and courteous as before. No matter how the 3 of them treated him, or what thoughts they had in their hearts that day, they had indeed accepted him into the lower courtyard. Therefore, he did not respect the status of the 3 of them, but rather the fact that they had helped him earlier. Shi Shoujing saw that Zhang Yan's current attitude was respectful and had a good impression of him. The 3 of them looked impressive, but in reality, they did not have much power. They could only rely on their cultivation to suppress the disciples of the lower courtyard. Usually, they only thought about how to protect themselves, and occasionally used the sect's rules to discipline the disciples of the lower courtyard. But now that Zhang Yan had opened his celestial meridians, the rules of the lower courtyard were already useless against him. He no longer had to care about them, but he still behaved in such a manner. Shi Shoujing could not help but say in a friendly manner, "Junior brother Zhang, now that you have opened your meridians and broken through, you will be one of us from now on. You can call each other brothers." Zhang Yan smiled slightly and cupped his hands again. "Greetings, senior brothers." The 3 of them returned the greeting again. After straightening up, Shi Shoujing carefully examined Zhang Yan. He saw that his breath was coming out of his head, and the power of growth was about to move. It was obvious that after opening his celestial meridians, it was a sign of success. He could not help but sigh in his heart. When he first heard that Zhang Yan had opened his celestial meridians, he had thought it was a mistake. Now it seemed that he had misjudged people. No wonder the Zhou family had chosen him as their son-in-law. It seemed that there was a reason behind it. He had also read the Record of Inner Meditation of Xianyuan, and he knew the dangers within. Because this book was too complicated and mysterious, with thousands of threads, it was also called the Thousand Light Book in Xianmen. He thought that if it were him, he would definitely not dare to take this step. And this Zhang Yan looked like his talent was average. He had already hinted to him that the path of a strong man was the most appropriate. He did not think that after not seeing him for a few months, this person would actually open his celestial meridians and break through, and go straight to the gate of heaven. If this person did not have a great opportunity on him, then there was an expert guiding him from behind. No matter which one it was not something he could speculate on. Thinking of this, Shi Shoujing's expression became even more polite. He said, "Junior brother, please wait a moment. The senior brother from the upper house will be here shortly." Half a month ago, Zhang Yan had returned to the mountain. Originally, once the news of him opening his celestial meridians had spread, the celestial master from the upper house should have arrived immediately. However, for some reason, he had not arrived. It was only today that the confirmed news came, and only then did he summon Zhang Yan. The four of them waited for about an hour before a middle-aged Taoist wearing a feathered robe and a tall hat finally arrived. He walked into the main hall with a sullen face and greeted the three deacons of the lower house who had the word "Shou" written on them. After seeing this person, Shi Shoujing was slightly surprised, but he did not show it on his face. As usual, he cupped his hands and bowed to this Taoist. This Taoist turned around and stood in the main hall with his hands behind his back. He looked up and down at Zhang Yan, and said with a frown, "You are Zhang Yan? Quickly release your pulse, and let I have a look." Zhang Yan squinted his eyes, but did not move. "What, you don't know how?" The Taoist's face was rather impatient. He said, "Shift the flow of qi, let the primordial qi enter the meridians, circulate it through the orifices, and naturally manifest it." Zhang Yan still did not move, and only asked lightly, "Who is respect?" "You." The Taoist suddenly choked, and could not speak for a long time. He wanted to open his mouth to teach Zhang Yan a few words, but he was afraid of losing his identity and being laughed at if he argued, so he tried hard to suppress the anger in his heart, and said coldly, "I am Wang Yixing, an appraiser from the upper house, and specially came to check your pulse." Originally, the appraisal of the pulse needed to invite an immortal master from the upper house who was at least in the mystic light realm, and then the person being appraised would invite an elder from the clan to be the witness. However, because Zhang Yan was not from an aristocratic family, the appraisers from the upper house relied on their status, and no one was willing to come, so it was delayed again and again. However, the rules of the Yingcang sect could not be broken, and after more than half a month, they finally sent Wang Yixing, a cultivator in the clear qi realm, to deal with it. This Wang Yixing was also from an aristocratic family in the Xianmen sect, and this task fell on his head, and he felt that he had lost face, but his senior brothers forced him to do it, and he could not refuse. Therefore, his mood was extremely bad, and no matter how he looked at Zhang Yan, he did not like it. "Since it is the appraiser from the upper house, I will naturally take a look with senior brother." Zhang Yan silently circulated his Yuanjin, and immediately, there was a cloud-like aura that spread out. Wang Yixing could not help but let out a sound of surprise. Other people needed a moment to see the effect of the pulse, but Zhang Yan showed a strange phenomenon in an instant. This was not simple. However, after he took a look, he said disdainfully, "Fog phase, low grade." He waved his sleeves, cupped his hands, and said, "Goodbye." The three attendants looked at each other. Low grade? They also had discerning eyes, and although Zhang Yan's pulse did not seem to be very good, using a low grade evaluation was too casual. Since the appraisal was over, Zhang Yan did not stay any longer, and immediately said goodbye to the three attendants. Shi Shoujing knew that the pulse was related to Zhang Yan's choice of martial arts in the future. With the appraisal of low grade, it meant that there were very few martial arts that Zhang Yan could choose. He sent Zhang Yan all the way to the door of the main hall, and before leaving, he comforted him, "Junior brother Zhang, in my opinion, although your pulse is low grade, it is complete, and there is endless vitality inside. Even if it is low grade, it is still worthy of the low-high grade. It will be unfair to you. No matter, it is all low grade, how can there be a difference between low-high grade and low grade?" Zhang Yan's expression was as usual, and there was not a trace of unhappiness. Shi Shoujing secretly nodded. No matter how good Zhang Yan's aptitude was, his temperament was first class, and in the future, it was not likely that he would not have any achievements, so he said kindly, "Tomorrow, someone will come to pick junior brother up to the upper house. If you have time, you can come to the lower house. Of course, senior brother, please keep your jade finger, I will take my leave." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and left. Along the way down Haojue Peak, he also let out a long breath. If that Wang Yixing saw some high-grade pulse, he would have to spend a lot of words to explain. Fortunately, that person was not knowledgeable enough, and it was a fake story, so he did not see it. He knew that his identity was too special, and as a non-aristocratic family, he opened his pulse from the lower house and directly entered the upper house. It would definitely attract a lot of attention, and most of them did not have good intentions, so it was quite inconvenient to do things. The water in the upper house was deeper than the water in the lower house, so before he had a clear understanding of the situation, it was not good to be too ostentatious. As for the martial arts that Shi Shoujing mentioned, he did not care at all. Now that he had the Tai Golden Book in hand, when the qi dynamic was cultivated to a high level, it could be used as money and iron, comparable to magic weapons and flying swords. Even the Du family had to go through many ways to get this book. How could the gift from the sect be better than this? As for those elixirs and instruments that originally belonged to the true disciples, he had no intention of giving them away. He must fight for what should be in his hands. Everyone in the lower house was also waiting to see how Zhang Yan's pulse was. Not long after, the news came. After the evaluation by the master, Zhang Yan's pulse was only of the low-grade mist form. When everyone heard this, they felt a little better. Most of them thought that this was a matter of course. Without the support of a clan, without the gift of a sect, a mere cultivator of ordinary birth, to be able to open his meridians and break through closed-door cultivation was already a blessing from the heavens. How could they expect him to open a passable meridian? But in any case, since Zhang Yan was a disciple of the lower house, it was a foregone conclusion that he would go to the upper house after opening his pulse. It was not that there were no disciples of ordinary birth who entered the lower house before, but those people were all talented, rare geniuses. The aristocratic families usually used the method of marriage to recruit them, but when they heard that Zhang Yan's pulse was of the low grade, the aristocratic families who originally had some interest in him immediately lost interest. Chapter 37. Yutzang Sect, Changguan Zhanyuan, and Light Grotto. Ning Chongxian stepped on the fairy's finned fish, his sleeves fluttering as he walked on the waves of a vast swamp. The water in front of him rippled, and golden-scaled fish leaped out from time to time. Crimson-backed giant whales flipped and played. As far as the eye could see, the sky and water were one. Clouds and mist lingered in the distance, and the drizzle was like pearls and jade. The spiritual liquid of the sea qi spread everywhere. Taking a deep breath was like drinking sweet nectar, moistening the heart and spleen. He turned a blind eye to such a celestial scene, but he frowned and listened carefully. Other than the cries of cranes in the sky, he could also hear the tinkling of ornaments. The sound was ethereal, but it seeped into the bones, making one's heart itch. He could not help but snort. It's those exquisite jade ladies captured from the 3 pools of Lake Demons again. As soon as he finished speaking, he felt a breeze around him, and the mist in front of him dispersed. It was like a bead curtain was gently drawn, or like a painting being unrolled. A jade pavilion appeared not far away, and a young man with a golden crown on his head was sitting on a cloud couch. The maids on both sides were wearing full skirts, silk ribbons, and long skirts that dragged on the ground. Ning Chongxian stepped onto a floating jade staircase, tidied his robe, and bowed solemnly. Greetings, teacher. At first, the young man's face could be seen clearly, but when he looked again, it was as if he was in the mist, and could not be seen clearly. He laughed and said in a smooth voice, Chongxian, why did you come to visit me today? Ning Chongxian said in a deep voice, to ask for a girl from master. The young man was interested, and he sat up straighter. He smiled, Chongxian, you used to say that you only focused on Tao, and had no intention of finding a Tao companion. Why have you thought it through now? Very good, very good. Ning Chongxian said seriously, Master, this girl is not to serve me, but to be given to a meridian opening disciple. Hearing that Ning Chongxian did not do it for himself, the young man did not mind, and said with a smile, who is so valued by Chongxian? Tell me your name. Zhang Yan. The young man sat down again, and said casually, is it the Zhang Yan you mentioned last time? That's right. Benevolent master, not to mention this person's willpower and determination, I have never seen a second person with such a good nature in my life. We need to win him over to our sect as soon as possible. After a pause, Ning Chongxian simply raised his head and said, the lower house is a place where the aristocratic families of Xian men gather. Zhang Yan was born a commoner, but he was able to overcome all obstacles to enter the lower house. Moreover, he was neither arrogant nor rash after entering the lower house, and was able to size up the situation. Now that he has opened his meridians and broken through closed-door training, based on my observation, this person's temperament and bearing are the best of the best. Therefore, I originally intended to bring him under senior brother Qi Yuntian's tutelage, but senior brother Qi Yuntian was in closed-door training to forge magical weapons, so I shamelessly came to ask for a reward from master. The youth asked, what is the condition of this person's pulse? Wu Xiang, the evaluation given by the sect is below average. Next. Mist phase again. The youth was stunned for a moment, then he looked up to the sky and laughed, saying, strange, strange, isn't that the same as me back then? Ning Chongxian cupped his hands and said in a clear voice, when master broke through and opened his meridians, it was only a low-grade mist phase, but he was able to use this pulse to condense the Qi-Si floating sky dharma. Not only did he not lose to his peers, but he even surpassed them. Although the pulse is important, a cultivator's unwavering Tao heart is even more important. I see, I already know what you're thinking. The youth flicked his fingers, and a soft jade leaf floated towards Ning Chongxian. This is the Taoist book that I used when I was cultivating, so I'll leave it to you to decide. As for whether he can comprehend it or not, it all depends on whether that boy has this opportunity. Ning Chongxian reached out with both hands and respectfully held the leaf in his hands, then solemnly put it away. The youth shook his head, obviously dissatisfied with his overly serious behavior, and said listlessly, oh right, you just now said that you want to marry a girl, and I've approved it. Who do you have in mind? Tang Yen. Oh. The youth glanced at him meaningfully and said with a smile, you're good at scheming. If you send Tang Yen away, not only will you not have to pester her, but you can also use the boy from the Wang family to force this boy into our school. I dare not think so. The youth pointed at him and said, you need to change your serious temperament. You need to know that playing around is the way of the gods. Ning Chongxian said solemnly, with master above, how would I dare to be unrestrained? Forget it, forget it. The youth waved his hand and was not in the mood to say anything more. He knew that his disciple's character could not be changed. Ning Chongxian bowed and said in a deep voice, what about the matter of bringing Zhang Yan into our school? He did not get a reply for a long time. When he looked up again, he found that other than the mist, there was no trace of anyone above the blue waves. He sighed in frustration. Although the young man had left, he still bowed and kowtowed according to etiquette. When he stood up, he noticed that 4 words had silently appeared on the jade steps beneath his feet that were as elegant as clouds. Observe his actions and stop. On the second day after the pulse examination, Zhang Yan was meditating in the mountains when he suddenly felt something. He looked up and saw two cultivators standing on a flying boat. One of them waved down and said, "Zhang Yan, since you have opened your meridians, you are a disciple of the upper house. Come with us today." The person stretched out his hand and grabbed. Zhang Yan felt a pulling force. He knew that this was someone sent by the upper house to receive him, so he did not resist and allowed himself to be called onto the flying boat. He thought to himself, could this be the second stage of the clear chi stage, summon the clouds and summon the clouds? It is said that at this stage, the chi throughout the body is condensed. Not only can one gather chi to form a wall, but one can also use the Ming Qian chi cultivated in the body to move 100 kilograms of weight. After boarding the flying boat, the two of them did not say a word and drove the flying boat to the south. After a day and a night, they left the boundary of the 18 peaks of Mount Kanggu. A boundless lake appeared in front of them. This was one of the top 10 spirit caves in Donghua continent, where the main courtyard of the Yutzang sect was located, the Great Pool of Longyuan. Zhang Yan looked down at the mountains below him. He realized that Mount Kanggu was like a heavenly gate that blocked the way out of the Great Pool. In front of the gate, there was a stream of flowing water that was like a jade belt that was sandwiched between the two sides of the mountain. It looked like an opening to enter and exit. Even on the flying boat, he could hear the sound of rushing water. When he was cultivating on Mount Kanggu, he often heard his fellow disciples talk about the saying, Mount Kanggu's perilous mountain is the path of ascension, and the Great Pool of Longyuan is the leaping heavenly gate. Now that he looked at it, it was indeed very appropriate. The flying boat flew for another 10 days before a humongous black shadow appeared under the surface of the water in front of them. Above the black shadow, there was a continuous chain of houses with pavilions and terraces faintly discernible. It was like a provincial city in the mortal world. There were even floating islands and flowing waterfalls above it. After he opened his meridians, his eyesight was extremely good. He could even faintly see cultivators riding on flying boats and flying cranes passing by together. It was a scene of immortals. However, when he looked carefully, he could not help but be shocked. The black shadow under the water was actually an immeasurably huge black tortoise. When the Yutzang sect was founded, the founder of the sect had once used his great power to capture this black tortoise from the northern darkness continent. He then moved 9 majestic and famous mountains from the southern cliff continent and piled them on the black tortoise's back to surround the lake and build palaces and cities. With a glance, Zhang Yan saw that the endless chain of palaces and terraces was one of the 9 cities that were built around the 9 peaks, Jiuli City. The cultivators of the Yutzang sect all lived in the 9 peaks or the underwater abodes of the Great Pool of Longyuan, whereas, the families and clansmen of the cultivators lived in those cities instead. There were a total of a few hundreds of thousands of people, and this scene could be considered to have broadened Zhang Yan's horizons. After the flying boat flew for another half a day, it descended towards a small island with verdant hills and clear waters, and it stopped on the top of a mountain. One of the cultivators pointed to a pier at the foot of the mountain and said, "Zhang Yan, you can ride the boat from here and look for Marshal Uncle Wu in the Leaping Heavenly Pavilion. I'll be going back to report the order, so forgive me for not being able to accompany you." After the two of them gave their instructions, they did not say anything else and left on the flying boat on their own. According to the usual practice, the two of them would only be satisfied if they escorted him to the Leaping Heavenly Pavilion. However, the two of them took advantage of the fact that Zhang Yan was not from a profound aristocratic family and did not know the details. Hence, they did not bother to explain it to him. In any case, bringing him here could be considered as fulfilling the orders of the higher-ups, and they could not be bothered with what would happen next. Zhang Yan got his bearings and walked down the mountain. He walked out of the forest and arrived at the pier. There were people coming and going here, and there was even a small market. He found the supervisor of the pier and asked, "Supervisor, do you have a ferry heading to Luzhou?" The supervisor of the pier was in his 50s. His temples were white, and his face was wrinkled. At first glance, one could tell that he was a mortal. At most, he had cultivated some superficial qi refinement techniques. He glanced at Zhang Yan and saw that Zhang Yan's clothes were not extravagant, and he did not bring any attendants with him. The supervisor looked up and said in an old-fashioned tone, "Which peak and which sect are you from?" Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "I'm not from any of them." The supervisor snorted and waved his hand. "There are many distinguished guests coming and going today. Please wait for a moment." After the cultivators of the Yutsang sect opened their meridians, they were qualified to bring their family members or fellow villagers to live in the city. However, most of them were mortals or cultivators who had opened their meridians. They did not know how to fly, so they had to take a ferry from the outside of Azure Parasol Mountain and enter the Great Dragon Abyss Swamp from Heaven Gate Bay. Along the way, they had to pass by a few islands and villages to replenish their food and water. Finally, they could reach the few small islands in the innermost layer. The supervisor was responsible for arranging for them to board the ferry and head to Luzhou on the back of the Dark Turtle. However, there were many people coming and going every day, so the order of arrival was naturally determined by their status. When the supervisor heard that Zhang Yan had no background, he thought that he was here to seek refuge with his family. Hence, he ignored him. Zhang Yan could not help but laugh. He did not want to argue with a mortal. Just when he was about to reveal his identity, he saw the supervisor's expression suddenly change. He walked toward the group of people walking toward them with a smiling face. He kept nodding and bowing as he said, "Are you the relatives and friends of immortal Master Qin from the glittering Jewel Grotto Heaven? The fish boat is already prepared. This way, please. I'll personally steer the boat and send you to Luzhou." Zhang Yan glanced at them and noticed that the few people in the front could be considered as cultivators. However, their cultivation bases were uneven. The one with the highest cultivation base was only at the essence condensation manifestation stage. They were most likely from a branch of an aristocratic family in the Mystic Gate. In the face of the supervisor's flattery, the few people nodded in a reserved manner. One of them, who was dressed like a scholar, paused when he passed by Zhang Yan. He turned around and said with a smile, "Senior brother, it's fate that we met. Why don't we board together?" If it was someone else standing at the dock, he would not say anything. However, Zhang Yan's figure and appearance were outstanding. Even if he was thrown into a crowd of 10,000 people, he would still be able to recognize him at a glance. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he was a dragon among men. No matter how he looked at him, he did not look like an ordinary disciple. Hence, he invited him. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Thank you, senior brother." When they boarded the fish boat together, the man cupped his fists and said politely, "I'm Qin Gui. May I know which immortal master you're under?" Zhang Yan answered, "I haven't formally acknowledged a master." Qin Gui couldn't help but be surprised. If he had a master, then he did. If he didn't have a master, then he didn't. There was no room for falsehood. Even if he came from an aristocratic family, it was common practice to exchange sons and nephews. If he didn't want to say, he could just not answer. There was absolutely no possibility of denying. Otherwise, it would be deceiving his master. Hence, if Zhang Yan said so, then he really didn't have a master. After chatting for a while, Qin Gui discovered that Zhang Yan really didn't seem to have any background. He also didn't have any clansmen cultivating in the sect. Also, Zhang Yan's Yuan Zhen was hidden in his orifices. All the energy in his body was restrained into his bones and blood. Only one vein of vitality came out. With Qin Gui's cultivation, of course, he couldn't see any clues. In his heart, he guessed that this might be a commoner who had come to visit his relatives and friends. It seemed that he had really misjudged him. It was a pity that the other party had such a good appearance. Thinking of this, a slight contempt appeared on his face. He lost interest in Zhang Yan and turned to converse with the two people beside him. Zhang Yan was also happy not to speak with this group of people. He looked ahead and only saw a stretch of rippling blue waves. The lake water was clear and crystalline. In the distance, the islands and pavilions were faintly discernible. It made one's heart feel at ease. After the boat traveled for 2 hours, when they were almost at Luzhou, the sound of flutes and harps suddenly sounded on the opposite shore. Everyone raised their heads to look. Qin Gui's face showed surprise. He took 2 steps forward and said, "The celestial music welcomes guests. Which esteemed guest has come to Jiu-Yi City?" A companion beside him rushed forward a few steps and said excitedly, "Reclining mat, silk curtain, jade and golden bells, silver baskets and copper fish, accompanied by 2 strong men and 100 women. This must be the celestial concubines of the 4 great grotto heavens." These people all had relatives and clansmen cultivating in the Yingzang sect. They knew that these celestial concubines were female cultivators nurtured by the master-disciple grotto heavens in order to rope in those disciples with outstanding talent. These female cultivators had high cultivation and had the support of the sect leader's faction. Other than certain reasons, they usually had a lot of freedom. If they could become Tao companions, it could be said that they had reached the heavens in one step. Therefore, the ordinary disciples in the sect all flocked like ducks, longing to be chosen by one of the celestial concubines. It was a pity that most of the people here usually wanted to see one but couldn't. They didn't expect to meet one here today. Qin Gui couldn't help but feel envious. He said, "The fairy of the grotto heavens actually came to welcome guests personally. I wonder which senior brother of the grotto heavens has such good fortune." Chapter 38. On the opposite shore, the harps and harps played in unison. As the fish boat gradually approached, the music became louder and louder. On the opposite shore, hundreds of female followers stood together, surrounding a white-clothed female like stars surrounding the moon. This female's bamboo hat was draped with a veil and her face could not be seen clearly. However, her graceful figure made people's imaginations roam. Her white hand lightly held the brim of the hat and lifted a corner of the veil. After looking at the lake, she walked out of the crowd and onto the stone embankment where the boat was anchored. At first, the people on the boat looked curiously at her as if they were watching a show. However, they gradually felt that something was wrong. At this moment, they were the only lone boat floating on the lake. The gazes of the people on the other shore swept over. The people on the boat couldn't help but look at each other. This was, coming to welcome someone on their boat? Who was it? They sized each other up. Finally, everyone's gazes focused on the handsome, red lips, and white teeth Qin Gui. One of them stepped forward and cupped his hands, saying, "Congratulations, Senior Marshal Brother Qin." Qin Gui forcefully suppressed the throbbing in his heart and pretended to be surprised. What does Brother Qin mean? On this fish boat, only Brother Qin is distinguished and has extraordinary looks. You are also from the Yongxi Qin clan. This fairy may have taken a fancy to Brother Qin. Brother Qin looked left and right and took a step back. He laughed loudly and said, "If Brother Qin ascends the Dragon's Gate, don't forget us poor friends." That's right, that's right. The people at the side all teased Qin Gui. If it's not Senior Marshal Brother Qin, who could it be? If you climb the celestial sect, don't forget us. Everyone's attention was on Qin Gui. As for Zhang Yan, he was just a passerby, too lazy to even look at him. Why is everyone making fun of me? I know my own abilities. How could I have such good luck? It's better not to speak carelessly to avoid angering the fairy. Even though he didn't admit it, Qin Gui's eyes stared unblinkingly at the shore. He couldn't help but feel a faint anticipation in his heart. One hand tightly gripped the railing of the boat and he forced himself to appear calm. The fish boat quickly arrived at the pier. Although Steward Qian, who was steering the boat, usually managed the business of welcoming and sending visitors, he was a mortal. When had he ever seen such a scene before? His hands and feet couldn't help but tremble in fear. When everyone saw the white-clothed woman leisurely walk over, they couldn't help but hold their breaths, their hearts pounding. The woman's gaze passed through the thin veil and swept across everyone's faces, finally stopping at Qin Gui. Could it really be me? He had only taken 2 steps when his sleeve was pulled by someone. He couldn't help but be furious. Turning his head to look, it was his companion who was signaling him with his eyes. Only then did he discover that this fairy did not even look at him and was walking straight to Zhang Yan behind him. He was first stunned and then his face flushed red. In that moment, it was difficult for him to endure the shame and indignation. How could he be willing to stay here any longer? He raised his sleeve and covered his face as he hurriedly walked away. I wonder where this person came from to be able to catch the eye of the fairy. Seeing Qin Gui leave in a hurry, the dozen or so people accompanying him looked at Zhang Yan's face with envy and jealousy. Finally, they left with long sighs. The white-clothed woman gracefully came in front of Zhang Yan and bowed. From under the bamboo hat came a voice that sounded like pearls falling on a plate. My name is Tang Yan. Greetings Zhang Yan. Towards this so-called fairy who suddenly appeared, Zhang Yan furrowed his brows. As the saying goes, there must be something wrong when something is out of the ordinary. His heart was filled with vigilance. In a deep voice, he asked, Who are you? I am a female attendant of the Changguan cave. Today, I have come under Senior Ning's orders to come and greet you. The woman took a step forward and slightly lowered her head as she said, Senior Brother Ning's intention is for this servant and Zhang Lang to cultivate together. As she finished speaking, her voice was almost inaudible, and it seemed to be filled with shyness. Zhang Yan narrowed his eyes. He did not get carried away by this good fortune. Instead, he felt that something was wrong. Making such a big scene to greet him seemed grand, but other than attracting attention, there was no benefit. He had just entered the upper house. How could he be so ostentatious? He looked around without batting an eyelid. As expected, there were many people who had stopped to watch. This was a place where people came and went. After this commotion, there were more and more people gathered. Although he had only spoken a few words with Ning Chongxian, he did not believe that the other would arrange such a thing. If this woman had made this decision on her own, then her motive was worth pondering. He laughed coldly in his heart. Different situations call for different actions. Did she think that he did not have any tricks up his sleeves? Countless thoughts flashed through his mind. However, a smile appeared on Zhang Yan's face. He said, Since it is Senior Ning's arrangement, I have no objections. Lady Tang, you can call me Senior Ning. Tang Yan nodded and said in a gentle voice, Yes, Senior. Zhang Yan asked, Do you have a place to stay when you come here? We have already moved out of the Changguan cave. However, since Senior Zhang is from the lower house, he can receive a cave abode from the Yutian pavilion. Tang Yan instructed a female attendant beside her. Lead the way. Bring Senior Zhang to the Yutian pavilion. A petite woman beside her walked out and said in a crisp voice, Yes. Tang Yan then turned her head and said to Zhang Yan, We are a group of over 100 people. The cave we will be staying in must be spacious. Senior Marshal Brother, don't forget this. Is clever and will explain everything to Senior Marshal Brother along the way. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He nodded and said, Thank you, Lady Tang. Tang Yan bowed again and said, That's not necessary. Senior Ning, you can just call me Yan. Zhang Yan nodded. All right. Wait a moment, Yan. I will be back soon. A smile seemed to appear on Tang Yan's face under her veil. Then we will wait here for Senior Ning. After Zhang Yan left, a pretty maid beside Tang Yan came up and whispered, Yan Yang, this Zhang Yan, other than his good looks, I can't see anything special about him. Why does Senior Brother Ning value him so much? However, this person is also rude. He is only a low-grade channel opening cultivator and he wants to become Dao companions with Lady Yan? Does he think he can afford it? Tang Yan said calmly, Ling, don't talk too much. Have you done what I told you? Ling smiled. Lady Yan, don't worry. I have already informed Wang yesterday. He has already sent word that everything has been arranged. This time, we will definitely make that Zhang Yan unable to advance or retreat. He will lose all his face. Tang Yan played with her hair and said, that's good. Then, she sighed. She looked into the distance. Her eyes were blurred at first, then flashed with a hint of determination. She started cultivating at the age of 5 and was brought up by Reverend Sun Ji Yan since she was a child. She knew that she was of low birth and was only used by the Grotto Heaven to attract talented disciples. However, because Reverend favored her so much, she gradually had other thoughts and thought that she was superior to others. She did not expect that this time, with just a sentence from Ning Chongxian, she would be given away like a commodity. Moreover, she was a cultivator who did not even have a clear qi cultivation. She was both sad and resentful. Even though Ning Chongxian said that Zhang Yan had a bright future ahead of him, in her eyes, it was just a castle in the air, a reflection of the moon in the water. Moreover, it was precisely because she knew Zhang Yan's background that she looked down on him even more. He was just a little cultivator with no background, and the pulse he opened was only of the lower rank. Did he really think that everyone was as talented as Immortal Sun? Actually, she had her heart set on Ning Chongxian. He had cultivated for less than 50 years and reached the 3rd level of the Mystic Light stage. It could be said that he was talented. However, Ning Chongxian's Dao heart was perfect and could not accommodate any other desires. Thus, she settled for the second best and hoped to become Dao companions with a disciple of a Xianmen family. However, she did not expect that Reverend would actually give her to Zhang Yan. She was not willing. This time, when she set up the formation on the shore, she did not really want to give in to Zhang Yan. Instead, she planned to lift him up high and then throw him down heavily. They were a group of more than 100 people. Disregarding the needs of their cultivation, just their daily food and drinks would be a huge expense. If they did not have a superior cave abode, they would definitely not be able to support them. In this aspect, she had already made arrangements. Once Zhang Yan could not get a superior cave abode to accommodate them, she would stand here for a few days and nights and make a big fuss. She wanted to let everyone in the Yutsang sect know about it. At that time, she would like to see if Zhang Yan still had the face to keep her. She knew Reverend's temper. If Zhang Yan did not live up to expectations and was forced into a difficult situation by her, not only would Reverend not blame her, but he would also praise her for her intelligence. It was not impossible for her to return to the Longview cave. At this moment, the female attendant called Dai Er led Zhang Yan all the way to the Leaping Heavens Pavilion. The Leaping Heavens Pavilion was not located in Jiu-Yi City. Instead, it occupied a spiritual peak. The courtyard occupied a vast area. On both sides of the courtyard were Wei-K-high platforms. 100 feet wide white jade stone staircase led from the bottom of the mountain to the peak. Spiritual birds could be seen on the eaves of the corridors and eaves, pecking at their feathers. The 3 words Leaping Heavens Pavilion were hung horizontally at the front of the main hall. The words were written in a lively manner. With just a glance, one would feel as if their heart was about to soar into the sky. Zhang Yan and Dai Er entered the main hall and stated their purpose. The Daoist on duty cupped his hands and went to report. Not long after, a thin middle-aged Daoist walked out. Zhang Yan looked at him. This person's level of cultivation was roughly the same as the 2 who received him the other day. He was only a clear qi cultivator. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, I am Zhang Yan. May I know how I should address you, Immortal Master? Actually, the cultivation of the deacons in the Leaping Heavens Pavilion was not high. Due to the need to arrange the cultivation abodes for the disciples of the various sects and peaks, as well as other matters, there were many daily affairs. Cultivators with high cultivation levels were not interested in this. Those who could manage here were mostly like the deacons of the lower house. They were cultivators with no extravagant hopes of advancing on the path of cultivation. The Taoist glanced at Zhang Yan and said indifferently, I am Huang Shouhe. Are you here to ask for a cultivation abode? That's right. The Taoist said indifferently, each cultivation abode has a fixed number of cultivation abodes. They are divided into 4 grades, A, B, C, and D. You have come at a bad time. The A and B grade abodes have already been occupied. Only the C and D grade abodes are left. Do you think they are suitable? Before Zhang Yan could speak, Dai Er rushed out and shouted, Lang Jun, the C and D grade abodes are small and can only fit a dozen people. Furthermore, the spiritual energy is muddy. How can anyone live in them? The Taoist sneered and said, right now, there are only C and D grade abodes that can be used. If we wait a few more days, I'm afraid there won't even be a cave of this grade. If you are dissatisfied, you should choose a place to live. Chapter 39. The abode used by cultivators was just a general term for the place of cultivation. To be specific, it was divided into 6 grades, namely, abode, blessed land, true palace, chi abode, mysterious cottage, and refined abode. Amongst them, it was further differentiated by the amount of chi vein and spiritual opportunity. These so-called first, second, third, and fourth abode were merely the lowest grade of mysterious cottage and refined abode. They couldn't even be considered as a true palace or chi abode, let alone a abode or blessed land. Hearing Huang Shouhe's words, Dai Er wanted to argue but Zhang Yan raised his hand to stop her. Dai Er, leave first. Butterfly was originally unwilling, but when Zhang Yan's gaze swept over her, her heart inexplicably trembled. She timidly said, yes. She reluctantly retreated. Zhang Yan turned to Huang Shouhe and said, I want the cave dwelling. Huang Shouhe stroked his beard and glanced at Zhang Yan. Good, junior brother Zhang knows the rules. I have a C-grade cave dwelling here. I'll go get the token for you. Wait. Just as Huang Shouhe was about to turn around, Zhang Yan stopped him. He slowly took a step forward and said with a smile, I'm afraid senior brother is mistaken. What I came here for is not the mysterious hut, but the blessed paradise. What? A blessed land? Huang Shouhe's face darkened and he scolded, you're just a meridian cultivator who just entered the upper house and you want a blessed land? Arrogant. Do you know that only enlightened beings can live in blessed lands? Even those mystic light realm senior brothers might not be able to get one, let alone you. Zhang Yan's expression didn't change. Senior brother, you're wrong. If it was someone else, I wouldn't be able to, but I'm a disciple of the lower house. Now that I've opened my meridian and entered the upper house, it's reasonable for me to ask for a blessed land. Huang Shouhe said coldly, even if you're a disciple of the lower house, you have to follow the rules when you enter the upper house. Since you're talking about rules, I'd like to ask, is this senior brother Huang's rule or the Spring Immortal Pavilion's? Zhang Yan laughed coldly in his heart. Did Huang Shouhe really think that he didn't know anything just because he had just arrived at the upper house? The matters of the upper house were not as secretive as the cultivation methods. Back when he was plotting to enter the lower house, he had already thoroughly investigated the details. Later on, he repeatedly asked Ai Zhongwen and the others for advice. Although he could not say that he knew the rules of the sect like the back of his hand, he was very clear about them. It was impossible to fool him on this. Huang Shouhe hesitated for a moment. This is naturally the Spring Sky Pavilion's rule. Pa! The table next to Huang Shouhe was suddenly smashed into pieces by Zhang Yan. He couldn't help but jump in fright. What are you doing? Zhang Yan took another 2 steps forward. His tall body approached Huang Shouhe. He said coldly, once a disciple of the lower house opens his meridians, he will become a true disciple after entering the upper house. He will live in a paradise and absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. This is the rule of the Yutsang sect. You're just a deacon Taoist. How dare you play tricks in the dark and say that the rules of a pavilion are greater than the rules of a sect? Do you think that even if I don't touch you, the elders and deacons of the upright purity courtyard can't do anything to you? Huang Shouhe's hand trembled slightly. He involuntarily took 2 steps back. He forced himself to remain calm. Don't try to scare me with these words. How can a mere channel opening cultivator like you be able to invite the elders of the upright purity courtyard? Zhang Yan laughed. I'm a true disciple. Not to mention the elders, even the sect leader can strike the golden bell and enter the hall to have an audience with me. It seems that Senior Marshal Brother Huang intends to test the power of the upright purity courtyard's punishment rod today. Huang Shouhe's heart skipped a beat. He groaned inwardly. Didn't Wang Xilang say that this kid has no roots and doesn't know the inner workings of the upper house? How did he know it so well? However, the matter of the abode of immortals was just to fool those who didn't know. He had been a deacon of the Rising Heavens Pavilion for a long time. The way he handled things was not something that the Wang family, who didn't know much about the affairs of the upper house, could compare to. He had already prepared a backup plan. Now that he saw that this method really couldn't catch Zhang Yan, he immediately gave up and put on a smile. Junior Marshal Brother, don't be anxious. I just now remembered that there is a vacant paradise. Perhaps it was reserved for you. It's suitable for Junior Marshal Brother to take it. He reached into his sleeve and pretended to rummage around. He took out a talisman that was neither gold nor wood and handed it to him. This place is called Spirit Rock Island. It's located southwest of Jiu-E City. This is the talisman to open and close the restriction on the island. I've appointed a deacon Taoist child to go with you. Zhang Yan smiled and accepted it. He cupped his hands and said, Thank you, Senior Marshal Brother. Junior Marshal Brother is too courteous, too courteous. Huang Shouhe waved his hands repeatedly. His face was full of smiles. It was as if the previous unhappiness had vanished into thin air. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. Although Huang Shouhe didn't dare to take out a low-grade abode of immortals to act as a cover, there must be a reason why Zhang Yan didn't know that Huang Shouhe had so readily handed over a piece of paradise. However, he didn't want to delve too deeply into it. The path of cultivation had never been smooth. So what if there were some twists and turns? After Zhang Yan took his leave, Huang Shouhe laughed mockingly. He walked to the back of the hall with a smug look on his face. However, he saw Daoren walking towards him. He was shocked and immediately bowed respectfully, saying, Marshal Uncle Wu. This Daoren was the pavilion master of the Rising Heavens Pavilion, Wu Yu. When he saw Huang Shouhe, he nodded slightly and said, Did the one called Zhang Yan come by today? Yes, he did. Oh, which class of immortals did you give him? He is a disciple of the lower house. Marshal Nephew, as usual, gave him a piece of paradise. Wu Yu raised his eyelids and asked again, Which paradise? Huang Shouhe hesitated for a moment and said softly, It's the Spirit Page Island. Wu Yu frowned and said, You gave him that brutal place of metal, wind, and fire. Huang Shouhe hurriedly said, Although I tried to explain the reason, this person is arrogant and unruly. He didn't listen to my advice and thought that I was just trying to scare him. Thus, I could only give him what he wanted. You can't blame me for this. Wu Yu looked at him and sighed. You're on your own. He shook his head and walked away with his hands behind his back. Before he left, he shot a cold glance at Huang Shouhe. Seeing that the latter was still happy and oblivious, Wu Yu couldn't help but sneer. This Zhang Yan had just arrived at the upper house and Sun Jinren had already given him a maid. Although Sun Jinren usually didn't meddle in other people's business, he had no intention of using Zhang Yan as a stepping stone. How could it be so easy to meddle in a conflict between a master and a disciple and a noble family? Didn't you see how the attendants were avoiding him? Yet, you still wanted to curry favor with the Wang family? Be careful that you don't end up being smashed into pieces and die without a burial. Zhang Yan walked out of the Leaping Heavens pavilion with a Taoist servant who was in charge of leading the way. Seeing Dai walking towards him, he said, "Go and inform Madame Tang that I have chosen a blessed land." Paradise? Dai's eyes were filled with joy. "I don't know where it is, but I'll tell Miss Yenyang now. We have a flying boat and we'll meet you later." Zhang Yan said, "That's good too. It's the Spirit Page Island in the southwest." Dai exclaimed and covered her mouth. Spirit Page Island? Is there something wrong? Dai said anxiously, "Miss Tang, the spiritual vigor of the Spirit Page Island is tyrannical. Gold and fire qi run rampant. It's not a spiritual place for cultivation, but a place of death." She then complained, "Miss Tang, Miss Yenyang's place is a paradise of jade and immortal robes. She won't allow you to suffer. Why don't you go to another place?" Zhang Yan frowned and said coldly, "Does your wife want to cultivate and become a celestial or enter the palace as an empress?" On the path of Tao, one can only forge ahead and overcome obstacles. There is no peace, happiness, wealth and glory. If she doesn't want to follow me, it's fine if she doesn't want to come. As he finished speaking, he waved his sleeves and boarded the Taoist boy's flying boat. Dai's face was filled with anger and she stomped her feet angrily. However, she had no choice but to go back to report. Not long after, Tang Yen received the news. However, she remained silent for a long time. Ling's eyes were filled with worry. She walked up and said, "Miss Yenyang, I didn't expect this Zhang Yan to be so familiar with the Tao of the upper house. We can't leave for now. However, that Deacon Huang deserves to die. He actually brought out that place of death. Aren't we going to suffer together?" Tang Yen lightly opened her red lips and said, "It's not a big deal. It's just a few months of suffering. Zhang Yan has the ability, or else he wouldn't have become a disciple of the lower house. However, his opened meridian is the mist image. Let's see how he cultivates in the Golden Wind and Raging Fire Cave. 3 months later, the sect will have an immortal master to check his cultivation. If not, Zhang Yan will come out of seclusion in 6 months. By then, it will be easy for him to deal with Zhang Yan. However, during this period of time, you all have to be careful." Ling said carefully, "Why don't Miss Tang go and explain to Zhang Yan so that he doesn't know what's good for him?" Tang Yan shook her head and said, "How can we treat the Jinren's gift as child's play? If Zhang Yan doesn't have the ability to take care of us, the Jinren naturally won't interfere. However, if we make the decision ourselves, do you really think that Sun Jinren won't kill us?" Ling was so scared that she shivered. She didn't dare to mention the matter again. After thinking for a while, she comforted Tang Yen, "Wang Lang's talent is extraordinary. After he was born, he used the jade liquid to cleanse his marrow and refine his bones every day. He started cultivating at the age of 9. It has been 11 years since then, and he is already at the second tier of the clear qi stage. He is also from the Wang family of Haopu. I heard that he has recently become the disciple of immortal Master Duda. His future is limitless." Tang Yen nodded and sighed, "I hope so." At this moment, Zhang Yan was already on the flying boat above the Spirit Page Island. The Taoist boy who was steering the boat pointed down and said, "Senior apprentice brother, the abode is at the peak of that mountain." Before Zhang Yan could take a closer look, he felt a murderous aura coming towards him. He couldn't help but squint his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, he realized that the center of the island was covered in fog. The highest peak was actually a bald volcano crater that looked like a cone. The island was surrounded by ancient trees that reached the sky. Spiritual birds and beasts were chasing each other. It was full of vitality. In the eyes of a Taoist like him, the spiritual qi of this island shot up to the sky. It was like swords and rainbows, like dancing flames. It was as if the entire island was wrapped in a golden red qi flame. The qi of heaven and earth was indeed too abundant. Although the abode that Huang Shouhe gave to Zhang Yan was indeed a blessed place for cultivation, going too far was as bad as not going far enough. For example, in this abode, there would be golden wind and blazing fire rising in the morning, noon, and dusk every day. It could boil one's meridians, burn one's meridians, and pierce one's bones and skin. The spiritual vigor was too overbearing. It was inevitable that one's foundation would be damaged if he cultivated here for a long time. As for the disciples of the aristocratic families who cultivated in the Yutzang sect, their meridians were rarely golden and fire elemental. Even if they had, they would occupy some abodes with milder spiritual vigor. This abode had been empty for a long time, but no one was willing to come here. The flying boat landed slowly. The Taoist boy didn't seem to dare to stay here for too long. He put Zhang Yan down and left hurriedly after giving some instructions. At this moment, Zhang Yan's feet were on the ground. After carefully comprehending the spiritual vigor, he was not surprised but happy. His Tai Golden Book was about to use the wind, fire, metal, thunder, and the qi of devilry gang to boil and refine the qi of Qianling gold. Now that the abode had come to him, it saved him a lot of time and effort. In the eyes of others, it was a dead place. However, in his eyes, it was a real blessed place. He looked up to the sky and laughed, as the saying goes, "Others' poison is my cure, nothing is better than this." Chapter 40. The Great Pool of Longyuan, where the Yingzang sect was located, was one of the top 10 spirit caves in the Donghua continent. The caves built here were as numerous as the stars in the sky. However, the rise and fall of spiritual qi followed the will of heaven and not people. Although there were many caves that were suitable for cultivators, there were also some that were extremely unusual. Only some cultivators who practiced special methods could adapt to it. Take the cave abode on Spirit Page Island for example. Tang Yen and the others could not endure the fiendish aura of the earth fire here and could only find a way to build a hut on a mountain that extended out of the island. Even so, they, who were used to enjoying life here, complained incessantly. Zhang Yan was not interested in Tang Yen. However, since Ning Chongxian asked her to be entrusted to him, he must have his reasons. Therefore, he simply left her there like a decoration and ignored her. This woman was proud and was not as easy to use as Luo Shao. Moreover, he and Luo Shao had made a blood oath, so he could rest assured. However, this time, Luo Shao went to find a place where the essence of the earth veins gathered to settle the Shell King and heal. It would be difficult for her to return within a year or two. Furthermore, the Yingzang sect was not a place that a demonic cultivator like her could enter easily. It seemed like she could only be used as a hidden chess piece in the future. The cave of the Spirit Page was located in the middle of the mountain. It had a vast interior. After it was built, not many people lived in it and it was not decorated. Only a few wall lizards climbed up and down every day, making the walls as clean as if they had been washed. There was plenty of water here. 3 rivers ran through the entire island and there were frequent storms brought by the Great Lake. However, the island was filled with strong qi and dust drifted everywhere. Therefore, the entire mountain was covered in a layer of mist and mud all year round. As a true disciple, there would be people delivering elixirs, spirit shells, grains, and all kinds of tokens and talismans to him every month. Not long after he arrived on the Spirit Page Island, 2 Taoist children were ordered to deliver shoes, jade tokens, a crown, a robe, and a dozen spirit shells. It was just a small amount and was nothing to someone like him who had 40 to 50,000. As for the elixirs, although they were also top grade, he had taken a lot of grand primordial elixirs from Duyu. It was enough for him to cultivate to the first level of the clear qi realm. The only thing he lacked now was a Taoist book. Even though he had the Tai Golden Scripture, he could not cultivate it without any help. He needed a cover to prevent others from noticing his flaws. However, the source of Taoist books was extremely difficult to find. The Taoist books of the master and disciple lineage were naturally bestowed by the master, while the aristocratic families relied on the family to search for them and mutually verify with each other. Although there were Taoist books in the Upper Academy Library, they were the most common ones. The rare and secret books were not in this list, so it was useless to look at them. Originally, as a true disciple, Taoist books were also bestowed to him. However, his pulse was only a low-grade mist elephant on the surface. There were indeed not many Taoist books that he could cultivate. Moreover, he was not born in an aristocratic family. Even if he had Taoist books in his possession, he would not easily hand them over. However, even though he could not refine the Tai golden scripture in a hurry, he could enter the broken jade to peek into its secrets. Zhang Yan picked up the cave residence token and made a hand seal. In an instant, all the restrictions on the Spirit Page Island were activated. As soon as the formation was closed, it immediately isolated the outside world from the outside world. Even dozens of mystic light stage cultivators would not be able to break in. It was very useful. He thought to himself that if he had free time, he would definitely study this formation. He reached into his sleeve and held the broken jade in his hand. His consciousness sank into it again. This was the first time he returned to the jade after opening his meridians. However, he felt as if he had been hit by something, as if he was blocked by a thick wall. When he took a closer look, he found that the jade clone was standing in the air. In front of him, there were several floating golden inscriptions lined up in a row. Other than the one in the middle, which he could see more clearly, he could not distinguish the number of the other inscriptions. He could not even see their specific shapes. Such a strange change surprised him. He could not help but look at the most obvious inscription. This inscription was very different from the ones he had seen before. It was as if it was constantly changing and rotating. After just a few glances, he felt dizzy. He could not help but be shocked. He had only seen such a situation when he first learned the inscriptions. It was because a cultivator's calculation ability was not strong enough. However, such a situation had never happened since he merged his two souls into one. This inscription seemed to be even more profound than what was written on the star steel. Zhang Yan's eyes gradually lit up. If he could solve this inscription, his understanding of the inscriptions would definitely reach a higher level. He did not think about anything else. He put aside everything else and began to calculate silently. After about 20 days in the jade, his body suddenly shook. He laughed loudly and said, "This inscription is just like my name. It is the character, Yen." As soon as he said this, the inscription in front of him suddenly shattered. Zhang Yan's consciousness was in a trance. When he woke up again, he was surprised to find that the scenery around him was no longer empty and dark. Instead, everything in the cave abode was reflected in it. He took 2 steps forward and touched the cave wall. Unexpectedly, it felt exactly the same as the outside world. He couldn't help but be interested. He walked a few steps further and found that the things reflected in the broken jade could only be seen 5 steps away. Beyond that, there was still nothing. Presumably, it was because his cultivation was not high enough. He thought for a moment, and his consciousness retreated from the broken jade. His real body walked a dozen steps, and when he entered the jade again, he couldn't help but be pleasantly surprised. It turned out that as he moved forward, the scenery in the jade also changed, and he could see the scenery within 5 steps without missing anything. His eyes flashed as he carefully examined it. An even greater surprise hit him. Within 5 steps, even the metal and fire spiritual chi was reflected in it. It should be known that the cultivation of the clear chi stage was divided into 3 stages: initial formation of the sea of chi, summoning clouds, and heavenly rain descending. If one cultivated according to the normal method, there would be no surprise or danger. However, the Tai golden scripture was different. This Taoist scripture was extremely dangerous. In the first step, initial formation of the sea of chi, one needed to guide golden light and fire into the body to temper one's primordial chi. This qi was divided into two parts. The first step was to cultivate the clear qi of heaven and earth. After that, one's qi would be as light as clouds and as heavy as a feather. The second step was to cultivate the turbid qi of earth. After that, one's qi would be as dense as fine iron and as heavy as 10,000 caddies. At the third step, one needed to combine the two qi and finally condense the mysterious light golden fire. However, each step of cultivation required the introduction of external qi to temper it. It was not something that could be completed by one's own internal cultivation. Originally, Zhang Yan did not have a teacher to guide him or a senior master to help him. He could only take one step at a time, which was extremely risky. He thought that the remnant of the jade would be of limited use, but he did not expect such a change today. He no longer had to worry about making a mistake. Zhang Yan withdrew from the remnant of the jade. He was surprised to find that only one day had passed in the outside world. He was even happier. One day in the outside world was more than 20 days in the jade. This was indeed a heavenly treasure. He subconsciously touched the remnant of the jade and felt that it was different from usual. He held it in front of his eyes and saw that the remnant of the jade was shining brightly. The originally misty gray areas seemed to have been peeled off. In the middle of the jade, there was the word yen. He secretly thought that in the past, his cultivation was too low to understand the mystery of the remnant of the jade. Now that he had opened his meridians and broken through, the etched words were probably the inhibition of the jade. He wondered what would happen if he unraveled the words. After looking at the words a few more times, he could not help but feel happy. He said, "This treasure is destined to be with me." At this moment, Zhang Yan's expression suddenly changed. He put away the remnant of the jade, picked up the tablet, and waved his hand to undo the inhibition. He strode out of the cave and looked up at the sky. He saw a person standing in the air with his hands behind his back. His sleeves were fluttering in the wind, like an unsheathed sword, full of spirit. He quickly went forward and cupped his hands. "Greetings, Senior Brother Ning. No need to be so polite." Ning Chongxian slowly descended from the sky. His eyes fell on Zhang Yan. He nodded and said, "You're very good. I've only been away for 2 months, and you've already cut off the golden lock and broken through meridians. You're faster than I expected." Zhang Yan smiled. "But what I got was an inferior pulse." Ning Chongshuan's eyes were like knives as he stared at him. "Did you think so too?" Zhang Yan smiled and said. Zhang Yan stepped into the mountain gate to seek the path of immortality. Although the pulse is inferior, it's still a chance of survival left by the heavens. This is my ladder to the heavens. How can I say that it's inferior? Good. You're so knowledgeable. I didn't misjudge you. Ning Chongxian took a few steps to the edge of the cliff. He looked into the distance and said in a low voice, "Zhang Yan, I originally wanted to take you as a disciple of a senior brother. His cultivation is 10 times higher than mine. If he could teach you, it would be a great blessing for you. Unfortunately, this senior brother is in seclusion to study and refine treasures. I don't know when he'll come out. If you can be patient and practice your skills, there will be a day when the worst comes to the best." Zhang Yan's expression did not change. He said, "If I get it, I'll be lucky. If I don't, it's my fate. Instead of placing my hopes on others, it's better to fight hard." Ning Chongxian looked back at him approvingly and said, "I'll leave the divine Rui shuttle with you for the time being. If you use my name to cause trouble in the sect, I won't be merciful. But if you encounter those powerful people, don't be lenient. Kill them when you need to. Don't hesitate." Zhang Yan said seriously, "I'll remember senior brother's teachings." From Ning Chongshuan's series of words, he could tell that he would likely encounter many unexpected troubles. But now it seemed that Ning Chongxian would not step in to protect him unless some influential people came forward to make things difficult for him. Ning Chongxian said again, "There are not many skills that can be practiced in the fog avatar. Even in the sect's library, there are only a few books, and the skills described are the worst. But it's better not to read them. He waved his sleeve, and a soft jade shell leaf flew to Zhang Yan. Take it. Zhang Yan caught the shell leaf in his hand. A strange touch suddenly came to him, as if something was trying to drill into his head. Ning Chongxian said, "Keep it well. This book is called the Secret Book of Lan Yun. It was found by my teacher in a cave on a cliff. He used this method to achieve the Dharma form of floating sky in the Sea of Qi. He is also famous in the Donghua continent. However, the method depends on fate. Even if 100 people practice it together, there may not be one who is compatible with the heavenly secrets. Whether you succeed or not depends on your fate." Chapter 41. The five-colored spirit lizard crawled past his finger and wagged its long tail as if it was trying to please Zhang Yan. It took away a jade bead in its mouth. Zhang Yan's gaze followed it all the way into the crack on the wall and smiled. With these spiritual beasts in the cave abode, they could catch flies, eat bugs, and clean up dirt. Poisonous snakes and fierce beasts would not dare to come close. Moreover, they only needed to be fed with one bead a year. It was really worth it. However, he felt that it was a pity that none of these living creatures could be reflected in the broken jade. Compared to these spiritual beasts, Tang Yan and the others on the North Island were useless to him. They were not even as useful as chicken ribs. He had taken the initiative to mention to Ning Chongxian about returning this girl, but Ning Chongxian did not mention it. There must be a deeper meaning behind it. After thinking about it carefully, he decided to leave these people there. Without the offerings from the Golden Pearl Jade Pool, he wanted to see how long they could last there. If they left on their own accord, they could not blame him. Zhang Yan thought to himself, "Senior brother Ning said that 3 years from now, there will be a big competition in the sect. At that time, all the disciples of the 9 Peaks will gather, and there will be no lack of outstanding experts from the younger generation. I heard that the rewards will be quite generous. I will work hard to cultivate, and when the time comes, I hope to be able to achieve something in the big competition." Although the direct disciples did not have to go out and fight, the competition between them was still intense. Moreover, the disciples of the other houses were hostile towards the direct disciples and would constantly provoke them. However, not only did the upper house not care about it, they even set up rewards to encourage such fights. There was even a competition once every 3 years to prevent the disciples' cultivation from stagnating. As for the rewards given by the sect, it depended on the cultivation of each disciple. Although they were both direct disciples, the Mystic Light Realm cultivators would receive 10 times more than the Clear Chi Realm cultivators. They would also be rewarded with treasures and flying swords. The two could not be mentioned in the same breath. Therefore, no matter from which aspect, the most important thing was to improve one's own cultivation. If he was a cultivator with a high cultivation, why would he care about Tang Yan's trivial matter? As the sky darkened, Zhang Yan walked out of the cave abode and came to the underground fire vent of the Spirit Page Island. Every day, it was the time when the earth fire surged for the 3rd time in a day. The mountain peak was filled with murderous aura, mist, and spiritual vigor. This was the best time for him to polish his Yuanjin. Over the past 2 months, he had been practicing the Primordial Unity Golden Script in the Broken Jade piece for the first 20 days, which was equivalent to 1 year in the outside world. Not only had he thoroughly mastered the script, but he had also tested the maximum endurance of his body at each stage. For example, at this stage, he could at most take in 3.5 mouthfuls of evil qi to refine his primordial qi. Any more and he would be injured, and any less would be insufficient. At the beginning, he could only take in half a mouthful at most. Now, as he continued to practice and adapt, the amount he could take in also increased. In this way, he could maintain the efficiency of his practice to the maximum, so that he could maintain the same speed of improvement in his practice. Those cultivators who practiced the Primordial Unity Golden Script in the past, even if they had elders by their side to protect them, would not be as bold as him. However, every step he took was practiced repeatedly in the broken jade piece. He only dared to practice on his real body when he was sure that there were no mistakes. Thanks to the record of inner meditation of Xianyuan, his control of qi activity was extremely Daoren. The moment he started practicing the primordial unity golden script, he did not feel awkward at all. Zhang Yan sat beside the earth-fire aperture. After a month of practice, he was about to refine the first mouthful of dry spirit qi today. With a loud boom in his ears, the surrounding smoke and dust rose, and the evil qi gushed out. His spirit suddenly became extremely focused. He slowly inhaled the golden fire evil qi through his mouth and nose, and then swallowed it. The evil qi washed back and forth in his meridians. Strands of primordial qi were forced out of his internal aperture. Under the corrosion of the evil qi was slowly dissolved, and finally turned into spiritual qi. He repeated this over and over again, and the spiritual qi gathered more and more. After an unknown period of time, he felt his internal organs churning. He opened his mouth and exhaled a turbid qi. When he looked carefully, there seemed to be a faint black and red color in it, which was the impurities of the primordial qi that were dissolved in his body. Zhang Yan looked inside himself and saw a mouthful of spiritual qi that was as clear as water flowing back and forth in his dantian aperture. Pleasantly surprised, he said, "It's done." The first mouthful of dry spirit qi was the most difficult, but once this qi was out, he would be able to draw qi from qi, and no longer need to painstakingly grind like before. His eyes flashed. Since he had already refined the first mouthful of dry spirit qi, he could use it to practice the first step of the method recorded in the Lanyun's secret book. When he first received this book, he couldn't decide which Taoist book he wanted to practice first. But after he carefully read through it and compared it, he discovered many profundities within it, and he felt that his worries were completely unnecessary. The clear qi stage was nothing more than grinding the primordial qi to refine spiritual qi. Here, the two Tao books were the same, but the emphasis was different. The Tai Golden Book emphasized on the word refine. It focused on the training of the qi activity itself, and only a few strokes of the method were used. On the other hand, although the Lanyun's secret book also had the method to refine spiritual qi, in Zhang Yan's opinion, it was not that brilliant. It was not even worth mentioning when compared to the Tai Golden Book. But this did not mean that this Tao book was worthless. This secret book emphasized on the word method. It mainly emphasized on how to circulate and move the spiritual qi after it was refined, and how to produce changes. In Zhang Yan's opinion, this was understandable. A cultivator who could practice the Tai Golden Book would at least have an upper or middle grade pulse. Once the qi activity was formed, it would be powerful and domineering, cruel and unparalleled. No matter how many changes were made, there was naturally no need to practice any more method to circulate it. However, the Lanyun's secret book was different. Most of the cultivators who practiced this Tao book were of the lower grade, which was much lower than the upper grade, so they could only use tricks on the changes of spiritual qi. In fact, cultivators who possessed the lower grade pulse were all well versed in all kinds of tricks to use spiritual qi. To put it bluntly, the Lanyun's secret book was innately inferior, so it could only make a fuss on the changes of spiritual qi. Zhang Yan did not dare to guess the cultivation of that Sunjinren. But in his opinion, he was afraid that he was a person who had developed the changes of the spiritual qi circulation to the extreme. The two Tao books focused on refining, and the other on method. Not only did they not conflict with each other, but they complemented each other, practicing and using as one. That was why he had decided early on that after he had cultivated the first breath of dry spiritual qi, he would try to see what was so wonderful about the method recorded in this secret book. He did not return to the cave, but stood there and started to circulate according to the method. According to the Tao book, once the spiritual qi was circulated, his body would become like cotton, as light as a feather. He could borrow the strength of the wind and tread on the waves and water. But the spiritual qi that Zhang Yan had was not something that a normal clear qi disciple could have. It was a trace of dry spiritual qi that was refined from golden fire and strong wind. It was the purest of all. As he circulated the method, he suddenly felt his body become light. Coincidentally, a gust of wind blew and his feet left the ground like a feather. This was something that he did not expect. He calmed himself down and his expression changed slightly. He took a deep breath and took a step forward. His foot stepped on the rising mist and his whole body was lifted up. As if he had spread his wings, he leisurely went straight up to the clouds. When he stood still again, he found that he was standing on top of the mist. He could look up at the stars above and look down at the great lake below. He could not help but sigh in his heart, the so-called riding the mist and clouds is nothing more than this. When I reach the second realm of clear qi, I will naturally be able to gather qi to form clouds and use it to travel in all directions. This is the way of the immortals. At this time, on the other side of the Spirit Page Island, Ling Er was complaining to Tang Yen, Yen and Yang, when will these days end? Over 100 of them were huddled at the edge of the island, all for the sake of avoiding the baleful aura. Those strong men were still fine, as they only relied on various secret medicines and golden sand to increase their cultivation base. Normally, they didn't need to do much breathing exercises. Moreover, their bodies were strong and condensed, as if they were a single piece. But these women were different. Most of their techniques leaned towards the yin attribute. When the golden phoenix fire appeared, they would feel dizzy and their internal organs would burn. Not to mention cultivating, they did not even dare to leave the door of the straw hut. They could only cultivate for 2 to 4 hours every night. Even so, they had to be careful, afraid that they would inhale the spiritual qi into their bodies. If the spiritual qi entered their bodies, it would mix with their yuanjin, causing their qi to be impure. Over time, their internal meridians would be damaged, and their foundations would be destroyed unknowingly. Hence, the spiritual qi on the island was like a poisonous beast to them. Seeing that Tang Yen did not respond to her words and seemed to have something on her mind, Ling Er rolled her eyes and said, I heard that Zhang Yan took Sun Jinren's secret book. I'm afraid he is worrying about the moon now. Upon hearing Ling Er's teasing, Tang Yen also smiled and said, there are as many mist avatars in this world as there are hairs on an ox. However, there are very few who are able to successfully cultivate it. Sage Master is a 1 in 10,000 genius. How can Zhang Yan compare to him? Yes, yes, yes. Ling Er clapped her hands and said, that's right. Tang Yen smiled and said, Ling Er, it's time. Go and cultivate by yourself. Ling Er tilted her head and looked outside the straw hut. She said, today's spiritual qi is finally over. Yen and Yang, I'm going to meditate. Go ahead. Ling Er bowed and left. Not long after she walked out of the door, she exclaimed, Yen and Yang, quickly come and see. Isn't that Zhang Yan? Tang Yen was shocked. She got off the bed and walked out of the hut. She saw Ling Er looking at the sky in shock. Following her gaze, she saw a person standing in the air with his hands behind his back under the bright moon. His sleeves were fluttering and his robe was dancing. At this moment, the stars in the sky were like a sea, making this person look like a celestial being. She looked over. If it wasn't Zhang Yan, who else could it be? Ling Er said in shock, how long has Zhang Yan been cultivating? How can he already control qi and fly? Didn't the people around Wang Lang say that his talent is average and not worth cultivating? Tang Yen suddenly felt a wave of irritation in her heart. Could it be that this Zhang Yan is really a cultivation genius like Ning Chongxian said? No, this person has no background and no foundation. Even if he has achieved something now, it will only be a flash in the pan. Although she thought this way, for some reason, there was a wave of irritation in her heart that could not be quelled. These few days, she had been exhausted by the fiery golden phoenix on the island. She wanted to ask Wang Xilang for help in advance, but she was still proud of her status and refused to lower herself. But now that she saw this scene, it was as if she had been provoked by something and decided not to wait any longer. She clenched the silk handkerchief in her hand and bit her lower lip. She said sternly, "Ling Er, come with me to write a letter to Wang Lang. Just say that we have been suffering from the spiritual qi here every day. It is unbearable and we have no one to rely on. I hope that he will pity us and come to rescue us soon." Chapter 42. Scarlet Cloud Island, Wang Clan's Cave. Good, I was right. This girl really can't hold it in any longer. If that's the case, I need to help her. Wang Pan stood up and slapped the letter in his hand onto the table. His eyes shone brightly and his expression was one of extreme excitement. His appearance was rough and his beard looked like needles. His body was burly and unlike an ordinary cultivator, he looked even more intimidating as he stood there. A young cultivator at the same table chuckled, "She's just a fairy, why do you care so much?" This person was Feng Zhen, a disciple of the Feng clan of Shinda in Donghua continent. Like Wang Pan, he cultivated under Duda. Wang Pan glanced at him and sat down. He picked up a wine cup and played with it in his hand. "Senior Martial Brother is a disciple of the Feng clan, you don't know the hardships of a small clan like ours." Yutsang sect had been established for tens of thousands of years. There were 5 major families, 12 major families, 46 famous families, 200 distinguished families, and 3,000 distinguished families. These were the Xianmen clans that made up most of the Yutsang sect's power. Other than that, there were also the disciples of the declining clans known as the Cold Spectrum. People like Zhang Yan were at most called commoners and were not important to these clans. Although the Xianmen clans were famous and out of reach, other than the major families and major families, it was normal for the other clans to change their status. The Feng clan and the Du clan were both part of the 12 major families and had thousands of years of history. The Wang clan that Wang Pan belonged to was originally only a distinguished family. However, for some unknown reason, a few Yuanying cultivators appeared in the clan, allowing them to barely make it to the list of distinguished families. Feng Zhen was confused, "She's just a girl, how can she help Junior Martial Brother cultivate?" Wang Pan chuckled and said, "Senior Martial Brother, you have been cultivating on the Pan Chi Island since you were little, so you don't know much about this. These celestial concubines used to be the maids of the 4 enlightened masters. If you can make them acknowledge you as their masters, not only will you not become Taoist companions, but you will also be able to enjoy countless benefits. Not only will you be able to enter the profound pavilion to read books for 3 times, you will also be able to use the great sky waterfall to cleanse your body. You will also be able to cultivate in the heavenly abode for 1 year and ask the 4 enlightened masters for advice. How could I let go of all these benefits?" At this point, a hint of ambiguity appeared on his face as he continued, "Moreover, this woman is beautiful and has a graceful figure. Everyone knows that I, Wang Pan, am fond of beautiful things. Even if I don't use it, it would be good to put it aside and admire it." Feng Zhen suddenly understood. He smiled, picked up the cup of wine, drank it in one gulp, and nodded. He originally thought that although this junior Martial Brother Wang had a straightforward appearance, he was not an impulsive person and would not lose his mind just for a woman. Only now did he know that there were other reasons behind it. Wang Pan flung the wine cup in his hand away and ordered his servants to bring out 2 rolls of silk. He dipped a brush into the ink and finished writing. Then, he placed each scroll into a bamboo tube and tied them with black and red ropes. After sealing them with wax, he summoned a river-crossing warrior and instructed, "Send these 2 letters to Zhang Yan's abode. First, give him the black one. If he doesn't accept it, then give him the red one. Go." The warrior obeyed the order and left. Feng Zhen watched with interest and asked, "I thought Senior Martial Brother would write a challenge letter, but now you have written 2 letters. Why?" Wang Pan laughed and said, "Although this Zhang Yan is a true disciple, he has only been in the upper house for 2 months. What can he achieve? Wouldn't it be beneath my status to gamble with him? The first invitation states that I will use medicinal pills and Taoist books to exchange for this woman. If he is willing, I will naturally invite him here. I will treat him with good words and fine wine, and it will also avoid a fight. The other invitation is a battle invitation. If he is not willing, then he will have to fight me fair and square. Let's see who can win the beauty. Feng Zhen clapped his hands and praised, Junior Marshal brother, you have a good plan. First, you show your might, then you take action. You have no choice but to submit. Wang Pan laughed out loud. Although that was what he said, he was actually thinking about it in his heart. Once Tang Yan's letter arrived, he would not only lose his status, but he was also afraid of provoking Ning Chongxian. Hence, he had to put in a lot of effort first. It would be best if Zhang Yan agreed to exchange pills for the woman. If he did not agree, he would have an excuse to cause trouble. After the river-crossing warrior left, he flew to the sky above Spirit Page Island. Seeing that the restrictive spells were activated and the killing formations were everywhere, he did not dare to be rash. He shouted from the clouds, "Is Mr. Zhang here? My master has ordered me to deliver this letter." In this month, Zhang Yan had cultivated 3 breaths of clear spirit qi. However, to reach the first stage of the clear spirit stage, he still needed 81 breaths of clear spirit qi to break through. Based on his current speed, it would take him about 2 years. This was because he had been cultivating in his cave abode, constantly consuming major elemental pills, and was extremely familiar with the technique. If it was an ordinary disciple, he might not be able to cultivate his first breath of clear spirit qi even after 3 to 5 years. In order to prevent Ning Chongxian from noticing any flaws, he also practiced another 12 breaths of billowing cloud pure qi according to the billowing cloud secret manual. However, when compared with the dry spirit pure qi, the difference in strength was immediately obvious. Not only was it impure, but it was also weak. How could it have the soaring momentum of the dry spirit pure qi? Therefore, he could not be bothered to cultivate more and simply left it in his dantian. At this moment, it was not the time for him to cultivate. He was meditating in his cave abode when he suddenly heard someone calling him. He walked out of his cave abode and saw a flying boat in the sky. He looked up and asked, "Who is your master?" The warrior answered, "My master is Wang Pan, a disciple of the Haopu Wang family. He cultivates on Qixia Island 300 miles away from here. Mr. Zhang and I can be considered neighbors." Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. He had also heard Ai Zhongwen mention many Xianmen aristocratic families. The Haopu Wang family had been in the limelight for the past few years. As a rising star, Wang Pan seemed to have briefly mentioned them. These aristocratic families had never paid any attention to a commoner like him. They usually did not interact with each other. Why would someone come to deliver a letter to him today? He took out the talisman and removed the prohibition, allowing the warrior to descend from the clouds. As the warrior got off the flying boat, he immediately held up the bamboo tube tied with a black rope with both hands and handed it to Zhang Yan. He said respectfully, "This was written by my master." Zhang Yan took it and did not hide anything. He opened it and saw that in the letter, Wang Pan first explained his cultivation level and background. Then, he changed the topic and said that he and Tang Yan had known each other for a long time. He heard that Tang Yan was not doing well on Spirit Page Island, so he wanted to take her to cultivate by his side. He was also willing to exchange 100 bottles of high-quality elixirs and 2 soft gold flying swords with Zhang Yan. After reading this letter, Zhang Yan immediately understood the other party's purpose for coming here. Tang Yan was actually useless to him. In his heart, he felt that it was not a bad thing to exchange her. However, when he received this letter today, he finally understood Ning Chongshuan's intentions. He was asking him to choose a side. If he agreed to this condition and compromised with the aristocratic families, Ning Chongxian would probably ignore him in the future. Now that he had no foundation in the sect and Ning Chongxian had treated him well, not only could he not agree to this condition, he had to reject it explicitly. Zhang Yan put down the letter and said with an indifferent expression, "I understand Senior Brother Wang's intentions. However, what he said in the letter seems to be using his power to oppress others. I, Zhang Yan, may only be a channel opening cultivator, but I have a proud character and am not afraid of the aristocratic families. Since Tang Yan is in my hands, she is my personal property. What does it have to do with him? I ask him not to waste his effort." The strong man's expression changed slightly. He reached into his robes and took out a bamboo tube tied with a red rope. He presented it to Zhang Yan and said, "My master said that if Mr. Zhang does not accept what he said earlier, please read this letter again." "Oh." Zhang Yan reached out to take it and opened it. After a few glances, he snorted coldly. Wang Pan was trying to be polite before resorting to force. This was a letter of challenge. In the letter, if Zhang Yan did not accept his good intentions, then he would ask Zhang Yan to choose a place to fight. He would come and decide who Tang Yan would belong to afterward. If Zhang Yan did not accept the challenge, he could hide on the island like a cowardly tortoise and avoid being ridiculed by others in the future. Zhang Yan laughed coldly and said to the strong man, "Wait for a moment." He entered the cave and took a brush from the table. He wrote a few words and passed it to the strong man. He said, "Pass a message to your master. I heard that your master's real palace, Qi Xia, has beautiful scenery and is full of spiritual energy. I wanted to keep it for myself. Now that your master is willing to deliver it to me, it would be impolite of me to reject him." The strong man was startled at first. Then, he understood the meaning behind Zhang Yan's words. If he was not restricted by his status, he would have jumped up and yelled, "Arrogant! A mere channel opening cultivator dared to boast so shamelessly. How dare he look down on a cultivator who had just entered the third realm of the light Qi realm?" Zhang Yan did not care about his emotions. After saying a few more words, he coldly said, "Since you have said what you want to say, hurry up and go. I am going to open the restriction and cultivate. You won't be able to leave after a while." The strong man did not want to stay any longer. He hurriedly boarded the flying boat and returned to Qixia Island. He then returned the letter to Wang Pan. When Wang Pan opened the letter and saw the two bright red words, "Absolute Competition," his eyelids could not help but twitch. The Yingzang sect encouraged the inner disciples to challenge the true disciples. This was called competition. The winner would only lose some pills and spirit shells. If the inner disciples won, they would be rewarded by the sect. However, absolute competition was different. If the true disciple lost, the right to cultivate in the cave and the true disciple would be taken by the winner. Similarly, if the disciple who went to challenge lost, not only would his life be at the opponent's disposal, everything including the cave would belong to the winner. Once the absolute competition was used, it would be a fight to the death. Originally, Wang Pan was worried that Zhang Yan had just entered the sect and there was still a gap between their cultivations. As long as Zhang Yan opened the restriction on the island and avoided the battle, Wang Pan would not be able to do anything to him and his reputation would not be damaged. That was why he used a provocative tone in the letter. He did not expect this Zhang Yan to be so ruthless even though his cultivation was not high. Putting everything else aside, his spirit alone was extraordinary. Wang Pan snorted and said, "What else did Zhang Yan say?" The strong man said, "Zhang Yan said that he will be waiting for you on Spirit Page Island in 3 days. Wang Pan was stunned. He laughed wildly, "Zhang Yan, if you don't accept the challenge, I can't do anything to you. If you accept the challenge, you will be seeking your own death. Others are afraid of the golden wind and blazing fire on your island, but I am not. This time, I will take over your blessed land and your female concubine. From now on, I will be a true disciple and enjoy the benefits of the sect." He thought to himself, "I already have 35 mouthfuls of pure and turbid spiritual energy in my chest. With one more mouthful, I will be able to reach 36. At that time, I will swallow the hornless life pill bestowed by Master and have a chance to step into the third realm of bright chi, heaven's rain descending. Since I have to fight Zhang Yan now, I might as well slow down and wait until I defeat him. He took out a brush and ink, wrote his name on it and handed it to the strongman. He said, "Give this to Zhang Yan. Tell him that I, Wang Pan, will arrive on time in 3 days to fight him to the death. P.S. Recently, I have been adjusting the outline of the future chapters, so I have slowed down the pace. Sorry, I received a message from a reader friend and decided to schedule an update time." Chapter 43. 3 days later, Wang Pan arrived at the Spirit Page Island for the battle. According to the rules of the school, once one reached the clear chi level, he could bring 20 strong men with him, ride on the cloud-mounted flying ships, wear the evil-suppressing jade pendant, and hold the copper dagger axes. Other than him, there were also a few good friends from the same school, including Feng Zhen, and a few brothers from the same clan. Therefore, there were 36 flying ships flying to the Spirit Page Island at the same time. This time, Wang Pan was determined to snatch the position of Zhang Yan's true disciple. In order to ensure that nothing would go wrong, not only did he bring along the purple copper dagger axe that was bestowed by the sect, he also carried a flying sword that could be considered a magic treasure. His magical robes and jade pendants were all neatly arranged on his body. In addition, he also brought along 2 jade pendants for his age. These pendants were given to him by 2 experts when he was 1 and 10 years old. Both of these pendants were capable of withstanding an attack from a magic treasure. The scene on the Spirit Page Island was completely different from where he was. Feng Zhen looked around with great interest. He had been cultivating on the Pan Chi Island since he was 7 years old, and he had never left the island for 28 years. It was rare for him to travel. A woman stood beside him, about the same height as him. She had smooth skin, cold and aloof, and there was not a trace of blood on her face. The people around her automatically moved 3 feet away from her. This was his younger sister, Feng Kong. Because she had cultivated the Yin art of life and death, she gave people a bone-chilling coldness. Feng Zhen looked down and asked casually, "What do you think of that, Wang Pan, sister?" Feng Kong looked indifferent and said, "Brother, I know what you are thinking. You just want me to become cultivation partners with that Wang Pan." Feng Zhen could not help but feel embarrassed, and his sister saw through his thoughts. However, he had to make it clear sooner or later. He sighed and said, "Sister, you and I are only of a branch of the family. We have no one to rely on since we were young. Even if you are talented, you are still alone in the family. Now that the Wang family is a prosperous family, and you are from the same school, if in the future," he was only halfway through his sentence when Feng Kong cut him off decisively. "There's no need to tell me. My father promised my mother that I would be in charge of my own affairs. I appreciate elder brother's kindness." Feng Zhen could not help but shake his head, but he was thinking about how to change Feng Kong's mind. However, when he looked around, he realized that Wang Pan was not going to fight. Instead, he had landed on the northern side of the island to meet Tang Yan. Feng Zhen had the intention of matchmaking Feng Kong and Wang Pan. However, when he saw how impatient Wang Pan was, he could not help but frown. A golden light wrapped around his body, and in the blink of an eye, he moved from the flying boat to the ground like a flash of lightning. "Yen Yang." Wang Pan slammed open the door of the straw hut with a bang and shouted. Tang Yan stood in the hut and stared at him. Her eyes were red and tears were about to fall, but she turned around and said, "You finally came." Wang Pan saw Tang Yan's aggrieved expression, as if she had been wronged. He laughed and was about to pull the girl into his arms when someone grabbed his shoulder, making him unable to move. He slowly turned around and saw Feng Zhen standing behind him. Feng Zhen shook his head at him and said solemnly, "Junior brother, the victor has not been decided. How can you lose your composure?" Wang Pan's heart trembled and he nodded. Although he did not think that Zhang Yan could defeat him, the battle had not been decided yet. Tang Yan was still Zhang Yan's private property in name. If he went up now, it would be too impatient and make a fool of himself. He was Duda's disciple now, and he had to care about the reputation of the sect. When she saw that Wang Pan had been stopped, Tang Yan felt slightly disappointed. She could not help but glare at Feng Zhen. However, there seemed to be a glaring light emitting from her face. She felt a stinging pain in her eyes as she involuntarily took 2 steps back. In her heart, she was shocked. Is this person Senior Wang Pan? He clearly has the cultivation of the mystic light realm. Where did he come from? When she opened her eyes again, Wang Pan was about to walk out the door. She anxiously called out, Wang. Wang Pan's footsteps stopped. His back was facing her as he asked, what is it? Tang Yan hesitated for a moment, then shook her head and said, nothing. Be careful. However, Wang Pan did not say a word and strode out of the door. Tang Yan sighed. She originally wanted to tell him that Zhang Yan could ride on the clouds. However, she remembered that Wang Pan was proud and arrogant. She was afraid that he would misunderstand and think that she did not have high hopes for him. Thus, she decided not to say it in the end. Wang Pan was indeed a little unhappy. Be careful. Be careful of what? Zhang Yan had only been cultivating in the sect for 3 months. Even if Ning Chongxian taught him some secret techniques, how good could he be? How could he lose to him? What a woman's view. After walking out, he met up with a group of people and came to the foot of the mountain. Smoke and dust billowed in the air above the mountain, and a murderous aura surged toward him. He laughed coldly in his heart. Others might be afraid of your golden wind blazing fire, but I am not. Zhang Yan, you want to use the terrain to win against me? You have made a mistake. He turned around and clasped his hands together. Brothers, please wait here. It will take at most 1 day, at least 2 hours. I will come back and drink with you all. Everyone returned the greeting with relaxed expressions. Only Feng Kong shook his head lightly. Second sister, you don't seem to have high hopes for Wang Pan. Feng Zhen asked in a low voice after noticing Feng Kong's expression. Feng Kong's lips parted slightly as she said, eldest brother, I think Wang Pan is a narrow-minded person. He looks handsome but is actually a petty person. Even if he wins against Zhang Yan today, he won't be able to go far in the future. Although Feng Zhen didn't agree with his own sister's evaluation of Wang Pan, the 2 of them had been separated for a long time, and their feelings for each other had grown thin. As such, he couldn't say anything more and could only shake his head with a bitter smile. Zhang Yan stood on top of a tree and looked down at Wang Pan, who was as small as an ant. His expression was calm, and there was no hint of the seriousness of the upcoming battle. The reason why he dared to fight Wang Pan was because he had 3 great treasures in his possession. The Rui spirit shuttle alone was given to him by Ning Chongxian to defend against Luo Shao. After his battle with Du Bo, he saw the power of this treasure. It could even kill a mystic light realm cultivator, so why would he be afraid of a light realm cultivator? Secondly, he wanted to test out the mysteries of the techniques recorded in the secret book of Lan Yun, so he could use Wang Pan as a practice target. A few days ago, he flipped through the book and came across a technique that could envelop an area of 1,000 feet in thick fog. It was the most convenient method to conceal one's body. Although ordinary cultivators could see through thick fog, this fog wasn't ordinary. It was formed from a breath of clear qi, so it couldn't be broken through with ordinary methods. Seeing that Wang Pan was climbing up the mountain at the foot of the mountain, he stretched out his hand and formed a seal. In just a moment, the thick fog spread out and enveloped the surroundings. Zhang Yan nodded, thinking that this was only formed from the clear qi of Lan Yun. If it was formed from the clear qi of dry spirit, the effects would be even more extraordinary. Due to the difference in cultivation methods and refining methods, the purity of the clear qi of dry spirit far surpassed that of ordinary qi. Similarly, the time needed to cultivate it was also much longer than that of ordinary cultivators. In Wang Pan's case, he only needed 36 breaths of clear qi to reach the first stage, initial formation of sea of qi. He then needed 36 more breaths of turbid qi to reach the second stage, summon clouds and summon clouds. After that, he would need to fuse the two qi into one and return them to their origin. Now, he only needed to fuse the last breath before he could reach the third stage, descent of heavenly rain. If Zhang Yan wanted to fuse the turbid and turbid qi together, he would need 81 breaths of clear qi of dry spirit and 81 breaths of turbid qi of Kuan spirit. Wang Pan climbed up the mountain and soon arrived at a flat area in the middle of the mountain. As far as the eye could see, all he could see was a patch of white fog. Unable to see Zhang Yan, he shouted, "Zhang Yan, I've arrived. Come out and meet me." "Wang Pan, I've been waiting here for a long time." Zhang Yan's voice sounded out from the thick fog. Relying on his high cultivation, Wang Pan wasn't afraid of the thick fog at all. He took large strides into the fog, but after 10 steps, he discovered that he couldn't even see his own fingers. He laughed and said, "Zhang Yan, you want to defeat me with such insignificant skills? Disperse." With a "hu" sound, he blew out a mouthful of turbid qi. Instantly, a whirlwind appeared on the ground, causing leaves and dead wood to fly into the air. For a moment, it was as if a heavy rain had arrived. Branches and leaves were broken, and the sound of plants falling to the ground was incessant. However, the thunderstorm was small. After the wind stopped, the fog only became slightly thinner, but in the blink of an eye, it gradually thickened again. Wang Pan couldn't help but be stunned. Zhang Yan secretly laughed. Although the secret book of waves of clouds was slightly inferior in terms of qi cultivation, it was unique in terms of the circulation of qi. How could it be dispersed by a mouthful of turbid qi? Furthermore, he had the clear qi of dry spirit, making his body as light as a feather. He could borrow the fog to soar into the sky at any time. He was already in an invincible position. Today, Wang Pan would definitely lose. However, what surprised him was that Wang Pan's mouthful of turbid qi actually contained golden fire qi. Although it couldn't compare to the earth fire evil qi, in terms of purity, it surpassed it. It seemed like his opponent's meridian was either metal or fire. Wang Pan thought to himself, no wonder he dared to come to the island to accept the challenge. Wang Pan blew out a few more mouthfuls of air, but the fog continued to disperse and gather again. Suddenly, he felt that he was in trouble. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly understood, this Zhang Yan must be using a delaying method to wait for the golden wind and raging fire qi to harm my spiritual energy. He must have learned some method from Senior Ning and is not afraid of evil qi. However, he doesn't know that I have a medium to high-grade fire vein and am not afraid of this level of evil qi either. However, he did not have the patience to waste time with Zhang Yan. He rolled his eyes and loudly shouted, "Zhang Yan, if you know what's good for you, then admit defeat and give up your position as a true disciple. The promises we made previously will not be changed. This way, you won't have to worry about your life. What do you think?" A moment later, Zhang Yan's reply came from within the fog, "Since we are already here, it is a battle of life and death. There is no point in talking anymore." Found it. Wang Pan's eyes turned sharp as he shouted, "Go." The escaping sound flying sword in his hand glowed with a red light. In a split second, it left his hand and flew straight towards the direction where Zhang Yan's voice came from. However, Zhang Yan could see it clearly from within the fog. He laughed in his heart, "That's exactly what I want you to do." With a flick of his wrist, a cloud-patterned vermilion brush slipped into his sleeve and he threw it into the air. The flying sword was approaching menacingly and whistled towards Zhang Yan's face. However, the vermilion brush was extremely steady and took the initiative to meet it. The tip of the brush only lightly touched the blade of the sword and the layer of red spiritual energy was dispelled. Then, it circled around the sword and brushed away the trace of blood essence on the sword. The body of the sword instantly turned dim and fell from the sky. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand to catch the destiny vermilion brush and the flying sword. He smiled and said, "Senior Wang, please forgive me for being impolite." Chapter 44. Wang Pan suddenly felt a pain in his chest. He had actually lost contact with the flying sword. He was shocked and angered at the same time. He scolded, "Zhang Yan, I know that Sun Jinren's lineage is proficient in using the fog to hide and retrieve flying swords. Senior brother Ning must have taught you a few techniques. However, don't think that I can't do anything to you just because you've learned a few techniques and are hiding in the fog." With a loud shout, he stretched out both his hands and grabbed. The sand and stones within 100 feet were sucked in by his qi. Dried branches and pebbles floated in the air and surrounded him. At the second level of Ming Qi, he could lift objects weighing more than 100 kilograms within 100 feet, not to mention these broken pebbles and branches. With a wave of his sleeve, these miscellaneous pebbles and rotten leaves immediately flew in all directions. Wang Pan continued to vent his anger on Zhang Yan for an hour, but he was still unable to find any trace of Zhang Yan. The mountain was filled with dense vegetation and was shrouded in fog. How could it be easy to find a cultivator who was deliberately hiding? Wang Pan could not help but feel a little regretful. He had previously boasted that he would be able to take down Zhang Yan in 2 hours and a day at most. Now that he had lost his magical weapon and his opponent was nowhere to be found, he would not be able to do anything to his opponent even after several days and nights, let alone a day. After contemplating for a while, Wang Pan thought to himself, perhaps Zhang Yan was bestowed with some magical weapon by Ning Chongxian. That's why he was able to retrieve my flying sword. However, if he had the ability, he would have already come down to kill me. Why would he hide in a corner? He must be afraid of fighting me head-on. As he thought of this, he touched the purple copper dagger axe in his hand and made up his mind. He said, "Looks like I'll have to sacrifice you for once today." He made a hand sign and shouted towards the sky, "Zhang Yan, look at the treasure." Just as he had expected, once the copper dagger axe appeared, his opponent reacted. His mind instantly lost contact with the magical weapon. However, he did not expect this magical weapon to be able to deal with Zhang Yan. Now that he had located Zhang Yan's general location, he shouted, "Zhang Yan, die." Wang Pan's dantian opened and he opened his mouth to spit out 18 mouthfuls of clear and turbid fire spiritual energy that were as red as crimson sand and as fierce as clouds. In an instant, the place where he stood was scorched with a layer of black color. Even the plants around him started to burn. In the blink of an eye, it had surrounded Zhang Yan's position for several tens of feet. The technique that Wang Pan practiced was called the Scarlet Red Rosy Fire Scroll. It was a fire attribute technique that his tribe had collected for him. When this Xian technique was practiced to a high level, it was as easy as flipping one's hand to melt iron and steel. However, there was only half a scroll. There was only technique, but no technique. He had a body full of fire spiritual qi but could not use it. For this reason, he had looked for many ways to approach it. Finally, he was able to become Duda's disciple. However, he had only been in the sect for a few months. Duda had only taught him a fire attack technique called the Scorching Sun Cauldron. It used 9 mouthfuls of fire spiritual qi to attack the enemy. Once it was used, everywhere it passed would be scorched. However, he had not mastered this technique yet. He needed 18 mouthfuls of spiritual qi to be able to use it. After the 18 mouthfuls of spiritual qi spread out, they each took up a position and sank into the ground. The scorching heat rose up and in an instant, the tree that Zhang Yan was standing on was set ablaze. Wang Pan's original plan was very good. However, he had miscalculated one thing. Because he had not mastered this technique, he could only use it on flat ground. However, Zhang Yan was able to ride on the fog. Seeing the scorching heat, he smiled and pushed off with the tip of his foot. Together with the cloud of smoke, he flew out of the range of the technique in an instant. Looking at the raging fire below, the fire energy shuttling back and forth, like a formation being stirred, Zhang Yan clicked his tongue in wonder. He wanted to test the power of the fire energy from the other party's Wang Pan, so he opened his mouth and spat out a breath of clear air. Unexpectedly, he only heard a chi sound, and the breath of clear air actually disappeared along with the fire energy, not the slightest bit of it remaining. He couldn't help but be startled. Then, he smiled bitterly and shook his head. This mouthful of spiritual chi was wasted. While he felt that it was a pity, Wang Pan felt his heart ache and was shocked. These 18 mouthfuls of spiritual chi were clear and turbid. Originally, he planned to cultivate 36 mouthfuls to break through to the third level of the clear chi realm. He didn't expect that Zhang Yan would accidentally produce a mouthful of spiritual chi. He had to go back and cultivate for another 2 months to make up for it. Furthermore, it wouldn't be as pure as the spiritual chi he cultivated in his chest every day. However, this wasn't a big deal. The key was that he saw that Zhang Yan seemed to have a way to get rid of the spiritual chi. He couldn't help but hesitate. Should he continue or withdraw the spiritual chi? After careful consideration, he gritted his teeth and added another mouthful of spiritual chi. He didn't believe that his opponent could really get rid of all of his spiritual chi. Today, he would fight to the end. Even if he exhausted the spiritual chi in his chest, he could just cultivate it back. Compared to the position of a true disciple, what was this little loss? Zhang Yan wanted to see the difference between his spiritual chi and Wang Pan's spiritual chi. At this moment, he breathed out another mouthful of spiritual chi. This time, it was like snow falling into a boiling pot, melting away in an instant. He shook his head. It seemed that this spiritual chi was far inferior to the spiritual chi of the clear spirit. However, at this moment, his expression changed. It was also because he was sensitive to spiritual chi that he noticed that there was still a trace of spiritual chi that hadn't dissipated. It seemed to be floating there. His eyes flashed and he breathed out a spiritual chi of the clear spirit. This trace of spiritual chi was pulled back and he put it into his chest to examine it carefully. With this examination, he discovered that although the majority of the spiritual chi had been worn away, the remaining spiritual chi was extremely pure. It was almost as pure as the spiritual chi of the clear spirit that was refined by the raging fire metal wind. Seeing this, his eyes lit up. A bold idea suddenly appeared in his mind. He decided to try again. He breathed out another mouthful of spiritual chi of the clear spirit towards the fire chi below. This spiritual chi was indeed worn away by the fire chi. There was still only a trace left. When it was about to drift away, the spiritual chi of the clear spirit wrapped around it and rolled it back. When he put it into his chest to examine it carefully, he discovered that it was much purer than before. The previous time was not a coincidence. If it wasn't for the fact that he was still fighting, Zhang Yan would have laughed out loud. It was because he suddenly realized that he didn't actually need to use his Yu-engine to train the spiritual chi of the clear spirit. That was time-consuming and laborious. He had to wait for the 3 eruptions of the evil chi of the clear spirit every day. He could first train the spiritual chi of the clear spirit. It was easy to train this spiritual chi. The time it took to train a mouthful of spiritual chi of the clear spirit would be 3 to 4 times the amount of spiritual chi of the clear spirit. Then, he could use the method recorded in the Tai Golden Book to train it under the raging fire metal wind. Presumably, the speed would be more than doubled. Whether it was the spiritual chi of the clear spirit or the spiritual chi of the clear spirit, they were essentially the same. It was only the method used and the purity of the spiritual chi that differed. Originally, he had insisted on using his Yu-engine to train it directly. That was the end of the road. It could be seen that sometimes, as long as the correct method was found, the crooked road could be turned into a straight road. That was a shortcut. With this result, he only hoped to try out his idea as soon as possible. He was no longer in the mood to continue playing with Wang Pan. He took out the destiny writing brush and said, "Go." The destiny writing brush only needed to circle around the area once to eliminate half of the 18 mouthfuls of fire qi. Wang Pan's incantation was immediately broken. Wang Pan jumped in fright. Only then did he realize that something was wrong. He knew that things were not going well. Unable to retract the remaining fire qi, he turned around and fled. Zhang Yan could see everything clearly from above the fog. With a flick of his sleeve, a green glow shot towards Wang Pan's back. Pa! Pa! Wang Pan felt 2 pieces of his jade tablets of age shatter at the same time. He immediately realized that Zhang Yan had an incredible transcendent artifact on him. He didn't dare to hesitate any longer and ran down the mountain with all his might. Zhang Yan laughed coldly and said, "What do you mean you can escape?" He formed a hand seal and the green glow, which had been slightly obstructed, advanced once again. This time, the jade tablet of evil warding on Wang Pan's body automatically leaped up to protect its owner. However, it was shattered like a thin brick. The Rui spirit shuttle's momentum didn't stop there. It circled around and severed Wang Pan's legs. With a miserable scream, he fell to the ground. Wang Pan's willpower could be considered strong. Knowing that his life was in danger, he ignored the sharp pain in his legs and used his hands as his feet to continue fleeing. However, this time, he didn't have another chance. His vision suddenly darkened as a 50-foot inkstone fell on his head. Unfortunately, half of his body was still outside. He didn't even have time to scream before the top half of his body was crushed into powder with a "kacha" sound. Even his origin spirit was crushed. He was completely dead. Zhang Yan kept his transcendent artifact and slowly floated down from the fog. He walked forward and searched Wang Pan's body. This Wang Pan was much shabbier than Du Yu. He didn't have a qiankuan sleeve pouch, only an ordinary sleeve pouch. Zhang Yan took out a few things in succession. Apart from the restriction token of the Scarlet Cloud Island Immortals Cave Mansion, there seemed to be nothing else of value. Even the flying sword and copper spear had fallen into his hands. However, at the end of the search, a bottle of medicinal pills caught his attention. "This is the Horned Dragon Life Pill." Zhang Yan's face lit up with joy. "I heard that in the third realm, due to the unification of yin and yang, there will be strange qi that will disturb one's spiritual vigor. If one isn't extremely talented, it would be hard for one to overcome it. However, the Horned Dragon Life Pill can suppress the strange qi and dispel the impurities. This saves me a lot of effort." He immediately put away the pill solemnly, turned around, and walked down the mountain. "Thank you for waiting for so long." The fog dissipated and Zhang Yan's figure appeared. He stood on the top of a tree, swaying with the wind. His robe and cloth fluttered in the wind. Even though the earth fire was burning behind him and the fog was billowing, his face was calm and tranquil. He didn't look like an immortal, but he looked more like one. The crowd looked at each other and felt like they were in a dream. They couldn't believe their eyes. This. Wang Pan lost. He lost his life as well. Some of them were at a loss and didn't know what to do. Feng Zhen's face was gloomy, as if it was covered with a layer of frost. He didn't notice that his sister, Feng Kong, was staring at Zhang Yan without blinking. Her beautiful eyes were shining with a strange light. Zhang Yan turned to face the strong men that Wang Pan had brought with him and said, "Wang Pan has been defeated by me. Now, there's nothing left of him and his soul. From now on, all of you will be under me. Today, I will let you all go back and settle your families and belongings. In a few days, I will go to Qixia Island to take a look. If you don't comply, you will be punished according to the rules of the sect. Do you understand?" Since it was a fight, and he had defeated Wang Pan, then all of Wang Pan's possessions, including his strong men, concubines, servants, caves, elixirs, magical weapons and flying boats, would all be under his name. He was even thinking whether he should take the initiative to challenge a few more rich disciples. This was definitely the best way to get rich. However, as soon as this thought popped up, he suppressed it. It was fine to show off a little, but it was not a good thing to be in the limelight. It was important to know that the tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. Moreover, Wang Pan's belongings would probably be enough for him to use for a long time. How would the strong men dare to oppose him? They were the personal possessions of the cultivators and no one would care if they were killed. However, if they dared to rebel against their master, not only would they be punished according to the rules of the sect, but all the sects and families in the world would also punish them. They had no choice but to comply. He said, "We will wait for everyone's arrival on the island." Chapter 45. Yen and Yang, he lost. Ling Er's panicked voice could be heard. Tang Yen had been waiting in the hut for news. Hearing this, she was overjoyed. She could no longer be reserved. She opened the door and said anxiously, "Ling, did that Zhang Yan lose?" Ling walked to the door and opened her mouth. She shook her head and stammered, No, it's Wang Pan who lost." Tang Yan's expression changed. With a pa sound, she raised her hand and slapped Ling across the face. She shrieked, "Don't spout nonsense." But for some reason, there was an inexplicable sense of fear spreading from the bottom of her heart. Ling covered her face and cried, Yang, it's really Wang Pan lost." Ling did not lie. Tang Yen suddenly felt cold all over, as if she had fallen into an ice cellar. Without a word, she turned around and shut the door tightly. No matter how Ling slapped the door, she did not make a sound. A channel opening adept could kill a stage 2 clear air adept. What kind of monster was this Zhang Yan? Was she really wrong? Did she really have to lower herself to serve this person? But when she thought of how he had ignored her, she felt hatred. Even when she was with a real person, she had never suffered so much. But now, with Zhang Yan, she had to suffer so many grievances. Ling sobbing voice could be heard. Yen and Yang, Wang Lang is dead. There is no one to protect us. Yen and Yang, why don't you pretend to be obedient? Tang Yan's beautiful eyes were in a daze. Hearing this, her heart moved. She thought to herself, why don't I obey this person first, in case he does harm to me? Yesterday, I met Wang Pan. In the future, I may have other choices. Only by keeping myself useful can I have a future. Thinking of this, she took a deep breath, as if she wanted to suppress all the emotions in her heart. Then, she put on a smile, turned around and opened the door, saying, Ling, come with me to dress up. I'll go see Zhang Lang later. Seeing that her wife had finally changed her mind, Ling happily said, yes. That night, Tang Yan went to visit Zhang Yan. However, she thought too highly of herself. How could Zhang Yan be in the mood to pay attention to her? He didn't care what she thought and immediately chased her back. Now, he only had eyes for the great Tao, and he didn't care about trivial matters like lust and lust. Furthermore, right now, all of his attention was focused on verifying the theory he had come up with during his battle with Wang Pan. The idea of using the blue cloud clear chi as the base to hone the clear spirit clear chi was extremely bold. He thought it was feasible, but when it was put into practice, it was not something that could be achieved in one go. He tried no less than 100 times in the broken jade before he found a feasible method. A sense of accomplishment could not help but overflow his chest. He first used his U-engine to cultivate a mouthful of blue cloud clear chi, and then spat it out, allowing it to be contaminated by the evil chi. Then, he kept it in his chest and used the Tai golden calligraphy technique to repeatedly grind it. When the strand of evil chi was exhausted, he spat it out. After repeating this process more than 10 times, he would be able to completely grind away the nature of the evil qi, and obtain a strand of pure clear qi. This strand of clear qi could not be used yet. He needed to cultivate another 7 or 8 strands of the same clear qi, and then gather them together to form a mouthful. Then, he would be able to cultivate it under the golden wind and raging fire. Finally, he would be able to form a real clear spirit clear qi. This process seemed complicated, but in reality, it was very detailed. It was more than twice as long as when he first used his U-engine to grind it. Furthermore, as he gradually got used to this method of cultivation, the speed would only get faster and faster. Cultivating the blue cloud clear qi was relatively simple. He did not need to spit out the evil qi 3 times a day. This way, he could make full use of all the time he had. This was because he had relied on himself to combine the advantages of the 2 Taoist books to improve the original step-by-step cultivation method. This greatly increased the speed of cultivation. He had originally estimated that it would take him 2 years, but according to his current estimation, he would be able to cultivate 81 clear spirit clear qi in half a year if he was slow, and in half a year if he was slow, he would be able to cultivate 81 clear spirit clear qi, and officially step into the first realm of the clear qi stage. However, he had been wholeheartedly focused on cultivation, and did not expect that the outside world was talking about him in an uproar. When the news of Wang Pan's defeat in the absolute battle spread out, those who had been paying attention to this matter first did not believe it, then they were shocked, and finally, there was an uproar. It was clearly Wang Pan who used his prestige to crush Zhang Yan. How did it become Zhang Yan who killed Wang Pan in the blink of an eye? It should be known that the actions of the disciples of aristocratic families not only represented themselves, but also the reputation of their families. As one of the top figures in the younger generation of the Wang family, being killed by Zhang Yan, who was 2 realms lower than him, not only would his reputation be tarnished after his death, but the reputation of the Wang family of Haopu would also be damaged to a certain extent. Therefore, everyone watched coldly and excitedly to see what the Wang family's next reaction would be. Would they fly into a rage out of humiliation and rush to cause trouble for Zhang Yan, or would they give up and turn the matter into a minor one and ignore it? Originally, the battle between Wang Pan and Zhang Yan had only spread within a small circle, but now, many cultivators in the sect were watching. In this way, the Wang family had no choice but to react as soon as possible. As expected, a few days later, the Wang family sent someone to visit Zhang Yan on Spirit Page Island. Mr. Zhang is here. I am Wang Mao, and I am Wang Zhenren, the ancestor of the family, Wang Zhenren. This person looked to be in his 30s. He had a wide face, thick lips, and a thick beard that reached his chest. At first glance, he looked somewhat similar to Wang Pan, but his figure and appearance were extremely ordinary, as if there was nothing special about him. Oh, it's Zhenren Wang's grandson. Greetings. However, Zhang Yan did not dare to underestimate this person. With a solemn expression, he personally welcomed this person into the cave residence. Those above Yuanying could be called Zhenren. This Zhenren Wang Yuan was a key figure in the rise of the Wang family in recent years. Over the past 100 years, he had pulled the Wang family from a low-ranked clan to a prestigious one. This ability was truly remarkable. Regardless of how Zhang Yan felt about the Wang family, he still respected this senior's achievements. However, since this Zhenren Wang had sent his own grandson here, he did not know what they would do next. After the 2 of them were seated, Wang Mao took the initiative to speak when he saw that Zhang Yan did not speak. He cupped his hands and said, Lord Zhang, please don't doubt me. I'm not here to denounce you, but to discuss a matter with you. Wang Pan is my younger brother. This time, he overestimated himself and offended you for the sake of beauty. His death is his own fault and cannot be blamed on anyone else. However, Zhang Yan waved his hand and said seriously, Brother Wang's words are wrong. Although senior brother Wang Pan and I had a decisive battle, it was a fair fight according to the rules of the sect. There is no enmity between us and no one is right or wrong. If I, Zhang Yan, was the one who died that day, it was also my bad luck. You cannot blame senior brother Wang. He had no choice but to stop this person from speaking. Regardless of whether it was Zhang Yan or Wang Pan, the two of them had fought according to the rules of the sect. Neither of them had broken the rules. If Wang Mao said that it was for beauty, then it would become a private fight. The meaning would be very different. Even if the Wang family did not follow the rules and secretly bullied him in the future, others would feel that it was only natural. Therefore, he could not allow this topic to be used by the other party. He had to be reasonable. Wang Mao was slightly surprised. He did have the intention of digging a hole. However, although Zhang Yan was young, he did not get carried away. Instead, he reacted quickly and did not leave a single flaw. Wang Mao nodded to himself. It seemed that Wang Pan's defeat at the hands of this person was not undeserved. Since everyone knew what was going on, there was no point in continuing to argue. Thus, he cupped his hands and said apologetically, I misspoke. Mr. Zhang is right. I came here today for another matter. Zhang Yan said, please speak, Lord Wang. Wang Mao stroked his beard and pondered for a moment, as if he was thinking of how to phrase his words. After a while, he slowly said, since Wang Pan has lost, everything he owns now belongs to Lord Zhang. Our Wang clan has been in the sect for over 300 years, and we will not cause trouble without reason. However, although Crimson Cloud Island is a cave abode, it has been managed by the Wang clan for over 100 years. The owner of the cave abode is Wang Pan, but aside from him, there are more than 10 other Wang clan members cultivating in seclusion on the island. Therefore, we would like to ask Lord Zhang to be magnanimous. The Wang clan of Haopu is willing to give you pills, flying swords, magical treasures, and books in exchange for the cave abode. However, if Lord Zhang needs anything, just say the word. As soon as these words came out, Zhang Yan was greatly moved. To be honest, Crimson Cloud Island was just a cave abode. He had the blessed land of Spirit Page Island in his possession, so this place did not catch his eye. Although he had won against Wang Pan, this place could not be considered his personal property. It was the most suitable place to trade for magical treasures and pills. Zhang Yan smiled and said, I will agree to this. However, let me make this clear first. I can redeem the cave abode, but since Wang Pan has lost, everything on the island belongs to me. Although the Wang clan members are cultivating on the island, they do not have any status in the sect. Whether it be magical treasures, flying swords, pills, or books, they all have to be left behind. Wang Mao also smiled and said, that is the right thing to do. Although he spoke casually, he felt a pang in his heart. On Crimson Cloud Island, Wang Pan had left behind many of his clan's belongings. Initially, he wanted to take advantage of the fact that Zhang Yan was young and did not know the ins and outs of the matter. He wanted to use the excuse of redeeming the cave abode as an excuse to take it all back together. However, he did not expect that this Zhang Yan would be so watertight. Wang Mao sighed inwardly and said, if that is the case, when can we redeem the cave abode? Zhang Yan said, half a month. Wang Mao thought for a moment and said, all right. At this point, the discussion was over and Wang Mao had the intention to leave. Just as he was about to stand up and leave, Zhang Yan suddenly asked, just now, King Wang said that senior brother Wang Pan fought with me because of my beauty. Who was the one who said that? Wang Mao smiled bitterly and said vaguely, there is no lack of meddlesome people in this world. Zhang Yan nodded his head. His eyes flickered and he asked in a low voice, I have a question for King Wang. Does the Wang clan wish to redeem their reputation? Wang Mao frowned and looked at Zhang Yan. He sat up straight and said, Mr. Zhang, please speak your mind. Zhang Yan smiled and said, since there are rumors that this matter was caused by my beautiful servant girl, why don't I hand her over to the Wang clan? Whether you punish or scold her, beat or kill her, it is up to you. What does King Wang think? Wang Mao's expression changed and he blurted out, "What are the conditions?" Zhang Yan said leisurely, "When brother Wang Pan was alive, he said that he was willing to use elixirs and artifacts to exchange for my beautiful servant girl. There should be many people who know about this. However, I can announce to the public that I am giving her to the Wang clan out of gratitude for their kindness." What does King Wang think? To him, by killing Wang Pan, he had already made his stand clear to Ning Chengxian. Tang Yan's usefulness had been greatly reduced. Now that he could send this troublesome person out, not only would he be able to ease his relationship with the Wang family, he would also be able to reap some benefits. Why not? As for how the Wang clan would deal with Tang Yan, that was not within his consideration. Wang Mao could not help but look sideways at Zhang Yan. The contempt that was ingrained in his bones earlier had now completely disappeared. This matter had started because of Tang Yan. As long as Zhang Yan announced that he was giving the beautiful servant girl to the Wang clan, he would be giving the Wang clan a way out of this embarrassing situation. Moreover, in the eyes of the outside world, not only did the Wang clan not use their power to oppress others or pursue this matter, but they even redeemed the cave abode with kind words. This was the demeanor of a prestigious clan. This caused Zhang Yan to be moved and take the initiative to give the beautiful servant girl to the Wang clan. In this way, not only could he salvage the Wang clan's damaged reputation, he might even gain some praise. He could not reject this idea. Wang Mao solemnly cupped his hands and said, "Good move, Lord Zhang. I am impressed." He had also heard of Tang Yan. Regarding Zhang Yan's scheme, he was as clear as a mirror. However, this was an overt plot, and he had no choice but to accept it. The two of them had exchanged blows, and it was he who was at a disadvantage. Deep in his heart, he really looked at Zhang Yan in a new light. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and returned the gesture. He smiled and said, "I dare not. It's just that King Wang is very virtuous." The two of them looked at each other and burst into laughter. Chapter 46. Several days later, Zhang Yan arrived at Crimson Cloud Island. After inspecting its surroundings, he couldn't help but sigh. In comparison, his own blessed land did indeed look extremely dangerous. Not to mention that the earth veins on this island were gentle, rich but not spicy, and that it was a rare true Chi Palace. The scenery on this island was one of a kind. There were countless waterfalls and flowing springs, and there was a huge red rock lying in the middle of the island, reflecting the light, making all the spring water look like lava. Moreover, every time the rosy clouds in the sky gathered, from afar, it would appear as if the sky was on fire, and the rosy clouds connected together. It was breathtaking. Moreover, this island had been managed by the Wang clan for 100 years. All the roads were made of white jade. There were palaces, pavilions, and waterside pavilions everywhere. They had even spent a lot of effort to build a floating island that showed off their status. There were exotic flowers and plants growing all over it. Just looking at it was beautiful. According to the strong men on the island, no one was allowed to land on the floating island without Wang Pan's approval. It was said that he had stayed there for one night before fighting Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan's interest was immediately piqued. He specially went to the island to take a look. It turned out that this wasn't just a residence. There were also many rare herbs planted on the island. No wonder the Wang clan wanted to redeem it. These things couldn't be given up so easily. However, he didn't care. Although the herbs were good, they weren't ripe yet. There was no benefit in taking them. It was better to exchange them for something more practical. At the center of the floating island was a well-maintained 3-story pavilion. There were many lush green bamboos planted around it. It was obvious that people often swept it. The jade steps were clean without a speck of dust. After entering the pavilion, he casually flipped through it. The first floor was decorated with gold and jade. At a glance, there was no spiritual qi. He wasn't interested and went straight to the second floor. There was a Xianwen star chart hanging there. There was a praying mat in the middle. It was probably a place where people occasionally meditated. After a few glances, he didn't find anything of value. It wasn't until he walked around the study on the third floor that he found something. In addition to many miscellaneous geographical records, there were also many books that he felt were of great value, such as The Secret Method of Eroding Runes, the handwritten notes of ancient cultivators, and so on. Of course, the one that gained the most was the Scarlet Cloud Core Fire scroll that Wang Pan used to cultivate. After flipping a few pages, Zhang Yan tucked the book into his sleeves and thought to himself, the stone of another mountain can be used to attack jade. The Wang Pan technique also has its merits and is extremely suitable to be practiced in the Golden Wind and Raging Fire. Why don't I take it back and study it carefully? Even if I don't fully comprehend its mysteries, if I meet a similar opponent in the future, I might be able to find a way to restrain him. After that, he searched around the island and ordered the strong men to move the pills, scrolls, magic treasures, and divine sand back to Spirit Page Island. However, in order to curry favor with Zhang Yan, the strong men moved the furniture, paintings, and jade away. There were 9 flying boats under Wang Pan's name on the island, but it took them an entire day to move all of these things. In the end, the Scarlet Cloud Island that Zhang Yan returned to the Wang clan was actually an empty shell. Everything of value had been moved away, but the Wang clan couldn't say anything because he was doing things according to the rules. Nominally, everything on Scarlet Cloud Island belonged to him. Even if the Wang clan tore down all the houses they built, they wouldn't be able to find any fault. Wang Mao hurried back to Crimson Cloud Island after delivering all the pills and magic tools that Zhang Yan needed. He saw that the grass garden on the floating island was still there and there were no signs of damage. He couldn't help but lift his sleeve to wipe the cold sweat off his forehead and heave a sigh of relief. He thought to himself that Zhang Yan really didn't go too far. Zhang Yan's harvest this time could be said to be bountiful. Tang Yan and the others had also been picked up by Wang Mao. In a great mood, Zhang Yan arranged for the strong men to stay in the place where they used to live, deactivated all the seals on the island, and went into seclusion. Pan Chi Island. Inside the hut, a middle-aged cultivator lay on the bed with his clothes undone. He used a large fan to pat his exposed belly and asked casually, "What's the background of that Zhang Yan?" This man's name was Feng Shang, Feng Zhen's great-uncle. No one knew how powerful he was, but he usually laughed and cursed without any sense of propriety. No one was willing to associate with him, but Feng Zhen knew that this elder was not simple. Feng Shang himself was the son of a concubine, and there was no one to take care of him in the clan. Therefore, whenever he had any questions, he would always ask this man for advice. In the past few days, Feng Zhen had already investigated Zhang Yan's background. Now, he hurriedly told him everything. Feng Shang stroked his sparse beard and said, "Back then, the master and his disciple had made an agreement with our aristocratic families. Those who were not disciples of the lower house could not directly inherit the position of a true disciple. Those who came from our aristocratic families had to first enter the lower house and train for 16 years before they could inherit the position. Zhang Yan was an anomaly. His talent was average, but he was able to establish himself in the lower house and become a true disciple. This man is not simple at all. In the past, entering the upper house from the lower house was the correct path. The other disciples had to rely on referrals to enter the sect. This status was innately one level lower than that of a true disciple. No matter how high one's cultivation was, as long as one wasn't strong enough to suppress a faction, they wouldn't have the right to inherit the position of an elder or sect master. This was why Wang Pan had hoped to become a true disciple back then. Feng Zhen sighed and said, "I'm worried about this. The more extraordinary Zhang Yan is, the more uneasy I feel." Feng Shang laughed. "Why do you have to be like this? Zhen, you've already reached the mystic light realm. Why would you be afraid of a cultivator who hasn't even reached the clear chi realm? I don't understand. Feng Zhen's expression was slightly awkward. He said, I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this for my second sister. Feng Shang was stunned. What's wrong with Yao? After returning from the Spirit Page Island that day, I noticed that her expression was strange. After that, I tried to probe her with words several times. After a few times, she finally told me the truth. It turns out that ever since we met that day, she already has feelings for Zhang Yan and wants to become Dao companions with this person. At this point, Feng Zhen sighed. The troublesome thing is that father once told her to choose her own Dao companion. If she insists on doing this, there's nothing I can do. Actually, what Feng Zhen said was only one of the reasons. Another was Feng Rao's background. Although she was from the Feng clan, she was the disciple of the glittering jewel grotto heaven's Qin Jinren. This Qin Jinren was the daughter of the previous sect master and had a high status in the sect. Not only was her cultivation high, but she also had a wide circle of friends in the Donghua continent. No one dared to offend her easily, be it master or disciple, or the Xianmen clans. Originally, the Wang clan had spent a lot of money to hire him, but they didn't expect Zhang Yan to kill Wang Pan. Hearing this, Feng Shang laughed out loud. He shook his head and said, as you said, Zhang Yan is handsome and is a rare beauty. His mind and intelligence are both extraordinary. The only thing he lacks now is his identity. If I were a girl, I would also like this person. Yao Er's eyes are not bad, not bad. Feng Zhen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said, Granduncle, I'm talking about serious matters with you. Why are you joking? Feng Shang chuckled and glanced at him. He said, you don't understand. I, your granduncle, have lived for 300 years without accomplishing anything. The only word that is worthy of praise is magnanimity. Feng Zhen was helpless. He knew that this granduncle of his was sometimes extremely shrewd, but at other times, he loved to talk nonsense. He often caused the elders in the clan to be put on the spot. When he was young, he also loved to cause trouble. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so disliked by the Feng clans. Feng Shang stretched and said lazily, you don't have to be anxious. In my opinion, this matter is extremely easy to solve. Oh. Feng Zhen's eyes lit up. He hurriedly stood up and cupped his hands. Please enlighten me, granduncle. Feng Shang said, I heard that Zhang Yan still hasn't acknowledged a master. Yes. Feng Shang slapped the large fan in his hand on his knee. He said, then find him a master. Feng Zhen was stunned. What kind of idea was this? However, he knew that Feng Shang wouldn't speak without thinking. Thus, he carefully followed the topic and asked, who does granduncle think is suitable? Feng Shang dipped his finger in some water and wrote 3 words on the table. He said, this person. Feng Zhen moved closer to take a look and asked in confusion, Zhou Chengju? Feng Shang narrowed his eyes and said, Zhen has been cultivating on the island for a long time. He doesn't pay attention to the outside world. Feng Zhen blushed. He said, this nephew is ashamed. Don't blame me. Why would I blame you? You're not from a small clan that worries about being schemed against all day long. As a disciple of the Feng clan, the path of cultivation is to have no distractions. Only by concentrating on one thing can you achieve Dao. Feng Shang turned over and sat up. He pointed at the name on the table and said, Zhou Chengju is currently the head of the Danding courtyard. Years ago, he owed me a favor. All these years, I haven't asked him for anything. If I want him to accept this Zhang Yan as his disciple, he definitely won't refuse. Feng Zhen was puzzled. He said, even if he accepts Zhang Yan, he still can't stop second sister's thoughts. Who said so? Feng Shang glared at him and said, once this person accepts Zhang Yan as his disciple, not only will no one in the clan ask, but Yao will definitely not be able to become Dao companions with him. Why? Feng Zhen's eyes were filled with surprise. Feng Shang smiled mysteriously and said, "Fine. Since we've come to this point today, I'll make it clear to you. This Zhou Changju and Glittering Paradise's Qin Yu were originally husband and wife. However, for some unknown reason, the two of them had a falling out. If this person accepts Zhang Yan as his disciple, Yao will definitely be obstructed by Qin Yu when she wants to become Dao companions with him." Feng Zhen lowered his head and thought about it. He felt that this method was feasible and couldn't help but nod. He then said bitterly, "According to what granduncle said, Zhou Changju also has a great background. That's going to benefit that Zhang Yan." Feng Shang chuckled and said, "How could I, your granduncle, not have thought of this? Let me tell you, Zhou Changju's cultivation base isn't high, but his alchemy skills are indeed extraordinary. Thus, he's always wanted a successor. However, he's very strict when it comes to choosing disciples. There aren't many people who can really enter his eyes. However, this person is also quite stubborn. Once he accepts a disciple, he's not allowed to change his cultivation base. Do you understand now?" Feng Zhen was stunned. Then, he came to a sudden realization and said, "So he wants to force Zhang Yan to change his cultivation base to alchemy, causing him to miss the proper cultivation base?" "Exactly." Feng Shang smiled proudly. "How can alchemy be so easy to cultivate? Before that, he needs to first practice the tongue orifice technique for 10 years, then the nose orifice technique for 10 years, and finally the eyes orifice technique for 10 years. This is commonly known as the 3 orifices observing medicine. In this way, he'll need to use 30 years of hard work. No matter how talented Zhang Yan is, he can only follow the prescribed order. If he vainly tries to betray his master and leave, then everyone has the right to punish him. His cultivation base is stagnant for 30 years. Does Zhen still need to take him seriously?" Feng Zhen was overjoyed. He clapped his hands and said, "Wonderful, wonderful." Feng Shang threw away the large fan and raised his hands. His sleeves slid down to his elbows. He said, "Servants, bring me a brush and ink. I'll write a letter myself." When the servants brought the brush and ink, he picked up the brush and wrote in an instant. He casually handed the letter to Feng Zhen and said, "Take this letter to Zhou Changju. You'll benefit from it. Go." You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.